When the last whistle fades and the crowd dissolves into the night, the stadium becomes something else entirely. The air, still heavy with the residue of sweat and spectacle, carries the faint echo of money moving quietly in the background. The floodlights dim, and in that emptiness, the sound of celebration transforms into something colder, an aftertaste of profit and pain. You can almost hear the ghosts of contracts and collisions blending into one final, hollow hum. I've stood in those empty cathedrals of the game, where glory once screamed loud enough to drown out the truth. All that remains is silence, thick, unflinching silence. The kind that makes you wonder if the cost of greatness is ever truly worth it. The NFL, America's grandest stage of competition, was never built only on touchdowns and trophies. It was built on deals struck in closed rooms, on signatures that traded bone and blood for fortune. The scoreboard might show who won the game, but it never shows who paid for it. There was a time when this sport was simple. Men played for pride, for the chance to be part of something larger than themselves. Back then, the fields were mud, the paychecks were small, and the glory was pure. But somewhere along the way, the cheers got louder, and the pockets got deeper. The game that once belonged to the people, raw, defiant, almost spiritual, became something else entirely. It became an empire. Empires by nature are built not on passion, but on profit. They grow by feeding on ambition and turning loyalty into leverage. The NFL learned that early. Learned that for every player who walks into the arena chasing a dream, there's a system waiting to cash in on it. Stadium seats filled with fans became more than just spectators. They became data, consumers, commodities. And as the years passed, the men on the field, once warriors of spirit, became assets on a balance sheet. I remember watching one veteran, shoulders slumped under the weight of 15 seasons, walk off the field for the last time. No cameras followed him, no interviews awaited. His knees were gone, his back torn apart by years of hits that made highlight reels for everyone but him. As he limped down the tunnel, the echo of the crowd he once entertained faded behind him. A week later, the league had moved on. The next man was already up. The show never stops. The money never sleeps. That's the unspoken rule here. Nothing halts the business of glory. Contracts can expire, bodies can break, legacies can crumble, but revenue streams flow eternal. The NFL learned long ago that fans forgive anything but boredom, and boredom doesn't sell. So the game evolved, modernized, polished itself into a spectacle so dazzling that few stopped to ask what was being lost beneath the lights. Behind the roaring crowds and billion-dollar deals lies something far more fragile, the human soul of the sport. For every owner who sits in a luxury box counting profits, there's a player sitting in a dark room counting pills, trying to dull the pain that bought someone else a yacht. For every corporate partnership that floods the field with logos, there's a forgotten man whose name once filled stadiums but now sits unspoken, erased by time and trade. Football was once a proving ground of heart, courage, and endurance. Now, it's a machine of flawless system designed to turn passion into product. Every touchdown is a marketing opportunity. Every hit is a statistic in a business report. And somewhere in that transformation, the essence of what made this sport sacred began to slip away. Still, we celebrate it. We buy the jerseys, we bet the games. We chant the names of men who will barely remember the day after the concussion set in. We glorify the violence, the precision, the dominance all, while knowing the cost. That's the paradox of the NFL. We're all complicit in the empire. Fans, players, owners, it feeds on all of us. I think about the men who came before the cameras, before the money. The players who worked factory jobs during the week and suited up on Sundays, not for fame, but for the feeling of being alive. They didn't play for sponsorships or brand deals. They played because football gave them purpose. Compare that to now, multi-million-dollar endorsements, stadium naming rights, broadcasting empires. The same game, but a different heart. You can trace the fault lines through history. The moment television entered the league, everything changed. Suddenly, the gridiron wasn't just a field, it was a stage. The league wasn't just a sport, was a story. Every broadcast was a commercial. Every play, a product. Money became oxygen. And when money becomes oxygen, morality becomes negotiable. The players became celebrities, and the owners became kings. The league's image turned into a fortress, impenetrable, beautifully packaged for the public eye. Scandals came and went, from labor strikes to injury lawsuits, yet the NFL only grew stronger. That's the power of the dollar. It can rewrite history. It can reframe pain as perseverance, greed as greatness. And maybe that's what makes this so haunting. Because beneath the gloss, there's a truth, the league docent market. This game consumes the people who make it great. Every yard gained comes with a price measured not in money, but in flesh and memory. Every contract signed carries an invisible clause, the one that says, "We own your prime years, and when you're done, we'll find another." Somewhere out there tonight, a rookie is watching highlights, dreaming of fame. He doesn't yet know the cost. He doesn't know the surgeries, the sleepless nights, the tax audits, the depression that follows when the lights go out. He doesn't know that the same league that will celebrate his rise will quietly ignore his fall. Because that's how the system stays perfect. Keep moving, keep selling, keep earning. The NFL has always been more than a game, it's a mirror of American ambition. It reflects everything we admire and everything we deny. The courage to chase dreams, the hunger to win, the greed that poisons both. It's the story of a nation that worships success but often forgets the sacrifices that built it. And in that reflection, you can see it all. The heroes, the billionaires, the broken men left behind. As I stand here in the quiet of this empty stadium, I can still feel the weight of their footsteps. The ghosts of seasons past linger in the air, men who gave everything they had for something that would outlive them, even if it forgot them. That's the price of victory. That's the silence after glory. And when the lights finally die and the last echoes fade, one question remains. Was it ever really about the game? Or was it always about the gold that glittered behind it? Money didn't just build the NFL. It remade it cell by cell, dollar by dollar, transforming a game once rooted in grit and loyalty into a global empire powered by profit. What began as an experiment of passion in the mud-soaked fields of the 1920s has evolved into a meticulously engineered business model where every blade of turf, every broadcast second, and every player's heartbeat has a price. The NFL didn't grow by accident. It was designed to. In its earliest form, football was chaos wrapped in courage. The league's founding teams Canton, Decatur, Racine played before crowds of hundreds, not millions. The men on the field weren't stars. They were steelworkers, factory hands, and ex-soldiers looking for a few extra dollars to survive. They played because they loved the fight, the bruises, the camaraderie, the identity it gave them. There were no billion-dollar owners then, no luxury boxes, no corporate sponsors. The league's currency wasn't cash, was pride. But pride doesn't last forever. In America, passion eventually meets opportunity, and when it does, money follows. The NFL discovered early that where there's a crowd, there's capital. Owners began charging admission, radio stations started broadcasting games, and by the 1930s, football had slipped from pastime to product. The Great Depression may have emptied pockets, but it also taught the league a hard truth. Survival depends not just on love of the game, but on who can turn that love into revenue. Then came the post-war boom, the moment the fuse was lit. By the 1950s, television had arrived, and with it, a new kind of audience. What once fit in a local stadium could now reach living rooms across the country. When CBS and NBC began paying the NFL for broadcast rights, the league discovered its most powerful weapon: visibility. Suddenly, every pass, every tackle, Every drop of sweat became content. The NFL wasn't just a sport anymore, was a spectacle. Pete Rozelle, the commissioner who understood the business better than anyone, once said, "We're not selling football. We're selling an experience." He saw what others didn't, that the real product wasn't the game, but the feeling it gave. Rozelle turned that insight into empire. He negotiated unified television contracts, marketed the Super Bowl as a national holiday, and transformed Sunday into sacred ground for advertisers. Under his watch, the NFL didn't just enter America's living rooms, conquered them. But every empire has its cost. With television came control. Schedules were built for ratings, not rest. Games were extended, replayed, packaged, and polished for prime time. The league adjusted rules, not for fairness, but for drama. Quarterbacks became protected assets, defenses were penalized for aggression, and offense was rebranded as entertainment. Every decision was filtered through one question: what's best for business? That question became the foundation of modern football. By the 1980s, the NFL wasn't just competing for fans, it was competing for market share. Advertising revenues surged into the billions, and players once afterthoughts in dusty payroll ledgers became celebrities and commodities. Endorsement deals exploded. Nike, Pepsi, and Gatorade turned athletes into icons, and the players themselves began to see their value not just in touchdowns, but in brand power. Joe Montana, smooth and unshakable, became the face of corporate cool. Bo Jackson blurred the line between sports and spectacle. Deion Sanders danced between fame and football, proving charisma could earn as much as skill. And behind every contract, every commercial, the league smiled. Because every dollar a player made was a fraction of the fortune the Shield collected. The NFL's identity shifted permanently in those years. What began as a brotherhood of men chasing greatness became a multinational corporation wrapped in the language of tradition. The owners, now billionaires with media empires of their own, began treating franchises like stocks assets to be leveraged, traded, or threatened with relocation. Stadiums, once civic landmarks, turned into bargaining chips. Cities fought each other with tax breaks and subsidies to lure or keep teams. Fans paid for the privilege of loyalty, often without realizing it. In the 1990s, the league's financial machinery reached new levels of sophistication. The television contracts ballooned. CBS, Fox, ABC, and ESPN each fought for the right to broadcast the league's crown jewels, driving prices to astronomical heights. By 1998, the NFL's national TV deal exceeded $17 billion a figure, so large it made the league recession-proof. Every broadcast was a goldmine. Every Super Bowl a global sales pitch. As television evolved, so did technology. Instant replay, digital scoreboards, 3D graphics, everything became sharper, faster, more cinematic. The NFL realized it wasn't just selling a sport, it was selling America itself, the mythology of competition, discipline, and dominance. Football is war, the old saying goes, but it's also theater. Every player a performer, every fan an investor in the illusion of glory. Today, that illusion is complete. The NFL commands over $20 billion a year in revenue, with individual franchises valued in the billions. The Dallas Cowboys are worth more than the GDP of small countries. A 30-second Super Bowl commercial costs more than an average player's annual salary. And yet, beneath all the spectacle, the league remains what it's always been, a battlefield. Not just for players, but for the power brokers who control the flow of money behind the scenes. The irony is hard to ignore. The same league that markets brotherhood and unity is built on ruthless competition, not just on the field, but in the boardroom. Owners wage silent wars over territory, broadcasting rights, and labor negotiations. The collective bargaining table has replaced the gridiron as the site of the game's most important battles. Every few years, players strike for fairness. Every few years, the league finds a new way to remind them who holds the keys. when Reggie White, one of the greatest defensive ends to ever play, fought for free agency in the early 1990s. He wasn't just fighting for contracts, he was fighting for dignity. "We're not asking for more," he said. "We're asking for what's fair." His words echoed through the league, a reminder that even in a billion-dollar business, humanity still demanded its place. But fairness is a slippery word in a world run by profit margins. The salary cap, introduced to maintain parity, became a paradox, protecting owners from overspending while limiting players from earning their worth. Teams spoke of loyalty while cutting veterans overnight. The league celebrated family while punishing individuality. Everything had its price, and the market always won. Even fans became part of the machine. Ticket prices climbed, merchandise flooded the market, and fantasy football turned spectators into strategists, blurring the line between love of the game and addiction to its economy. The modern fan doesn't just watch football, they invest in it, emotionally and financially. That's the genius of the system. It sells passion back to the people who created it. Still, there's something magnetic about it. For all its contradictions, the NFL remains the most captivating mirror of American life, its ambition, its hunger, its contradictions. It's a story of triumph built on trade-offs, of dreams financed by debt. The league's history is littered with legends who became symbols of hope and warnings of excess. Johnny Unitas, once the embodiment of blue-collar toughness, retired nearly broke. Meanwhile, today's quarterbacks negotiate half-billion-dollar deals before their prime. The game hasn't changed, the scale has. Listen closely and you'll hear it. The hum of industry behind the roar of the crowd. Each Sunday is a production, meticulously timed and priced. Each franchise, a portfolio. Each athlete, a brand. Greed and glory are no longer opposites, they're partners in the same dance. The league sells you both, and you buy them both, willingly. That's the heart of it. Money didn't just fund the NFL, it redefined its morality. Every rule change, every expansion, every broadcast decision has been guided not by spirit, but by strategy. What began as a league of men who played for survival became a corporation of men who play for legacy. The sport's soul, once wild, reckless, untamed, has been shaped, molded, and monetized. And yet, in the quiet moments after the games, when the fans go home and the helmets come off, that soul still flickers beneath the surface. Somewhere in the noise of billions, the original heartbeat of football still tries to be heard, the one that began in muddy fields under gray skies. When men played not for greed, but for glory. This documentary isn't about nostalgia, it's about reckoning, about tracing the journey from the game's birth to its corporate zenith, and asking the question that the league itself never will. When does success stop being victory and start being greed? Because the story of the NFL isn't just about money yet, it's about what money does to men, to morals, to meaning. It's about how the greatest game ever played became the most profitable, and how somewhere along the way, the line between passion and power blurred beyond recognition. And in that blur lies the truth of American football's soul, a truth too costly to ignore and too powerful to deny. It began not with billion-dollar stadiums or global broadcasts, but with muddy fields carved out behind steel mills and train yards. In those early decades of the 20th century, the men who played the game weren't chasing fame. They were chasing a few extra dollars to make rent. Football was a brutal pastime, a working man's brawl disguised as sport. Yet even in those first chaotic seasons, the seeds of something larger were being planted, seeds that would grow into the greatest money machine in American sports history. The NFL's founding years were shaped by contradiction. The game was born in passion and sustained by profit. In 1920, when the American Professional Football Association, what would become the NFL, was formed in a car dealership in Canton, Ohio, there was no grand vision of empire. 14 teams, most of them named after local factories or their town's industry, gathered simply to organize the chaos of semi-professional football. Yet, as soon as men started charging admission to watch other men collide, a new force entered the equation: commerce. Those early team owners were not visionaries of sport. They were businessmen, promoters, and gamblers. Ralph Hay, who hosted that first meeting, sold automobiles. George Halas, the face of the Chicago Bears, was equal parts player, coach, and marketer. They realized quickly that football, for all its violence and grit, had something priceless: spectacle. Crowds wanted to see men push their bodies beyond reason, and they were willing to pay for it. The first profit came in small increments. A few hundred tickets sold for a few cents each. Yet the principle was set in motion. If enough people wanted to watch, there was money to be made. The players, meanwhile, were treated like replaceable parts in an early machine. They were paid little, their contracts informal, their injuries ignored. But as cities began to compete for local glory, owners started looking for stars, and stars demanded pay. Thus, the cycle began. By the late 1920s, football was beginning to resemble business more than brotherhood. Owners like Halas and Curly Lambeau understood that success wasn't just measured in victories, it was measured in revenue. Teams moved from small-town leagues into urban stadiums, chasing crowds and cash. The game's first superstar, Red Grange, the galloping ghost, became the face of this transformation. When he signed with the Chicago Bears in 1925, it wasn't just a sports story, it was a national sensation. Grange's signing tour was the NFL's first marketing spectacle. Tens of thousands came to see him play across the country. Tickets sold by the handful. Newspapers flooded with coverage. For the first time, the league saw that football could sell not just entertainment, but identity. Fans didn't just watch. They invested emotionally in men and colors, in cities and rivalries. The NFL's soul was beginning to bend toward profit, one headline at a time. But with money came control. Owners began to understand that financial stability gave them power over the sport's direction. They introduced rules to protect their investments, not necessarily their players. Salary caps and contract clauses began to emerge, not to ensure fairness, but to ensure predictability. Even in the 1930s, when the league nearly collapsed under the weight of the Great Depression, the owner's obsession wasn't with survival of the game itself, was with keeping costs manageable and markets secure. The irony of the early NFL was that it sold the illusion of purity while operating on the logic of capitalism. Players were portrayed as hometown heroes, but they were assets. A man's loyalty lasted as long as his legs. Teams relocated, merged, or folded according to financial tides. In 1932, when the league introduced its first official championship game, it was marketed as a competition for glory. Behind the scenes, it was a strategy to generate headlines and ticket revenue during the worst economic collapse in American history. It worked. Attendance spiked. The league survived because of commerce, not conviction. By the 1940s, money had become the invisible referee governing every play. World War II brought hardship to the country, but it also reshaped the NFL's economics. Many players went off to serve, leaving teams desperate for bodies. Rosters were filled with replacements, sometimes men too young or too old to compete. But the games continued. The league refused to shut down operations, not out of patriotism, but out of necessity. It had learned the harshest business lesson of all. If you stop selling, the market forgets you. Even the introduction of television, first in the late 1940s, was seen as a financial risk before it became a revolution. Owners feared that if fans could watch from home, they'd stop buying tickets. Yet the moment the first televised games aired, a new era began. Money was no longer just in the stands, was in the airwaves. Sponsorships, commercials, and broadcast rights began to trickle in. Small at first, but soon unstoppable. Still, through these formative years, the game maintained an illusion of integrity. The players bled for pennies, the owners counted dimes, and the league quietly grew roots. But beneath it all, the fundamental shift had already occurred. Football was no longer simply a pastime, it was a product. The team owners weren't just running clubs, they were running brands. The transformation wasn't sinister at first, it was survival. In a world of baseball dynasties and boxing legends, football had to find its own economic logic. It learned to sell aggression, teamwork, and American resilience as entertainment. Every tackle became a story. Every injury a sacrifice worth paying to witness. The public bought in. The birth of profit also birthed inequality. While a few owners began to accumulate wealth, players remained at the mercy of that system. The league had no union, no medical protection, no collective bargaining. A player's worth ended the moment his knee buckled or his shoulder gave out. The average career lasted barely a handful of years, and when it ended, so did the paychecks. And yet, even those who suffered most fed the machine with pride. They believed in the game. They believed in the idea that their struggle meant something larger. That belief, the faith of men who would play through broken ribs for a small paycheck and a larger dream, gave the league its early legitimacy. What the NFL sold wasn't just football. It sold the American story. Work hard, endure pain, and earn your glory. The tragedy is that while the players embodied that ethos, the profits went elsewhere. By the time the 1950s arrived, the league was ready for its next metamorphosis. The seeds planted in that car dealership had grown into a financial empire in waiting. Franchises began to understand television's true potential. Sponsorships became more sophisticated. Stadiums grew larger, designed not for community gatherings, but for mass consumption. The owners' meetings became boardroom conferences, and the players' locker rooms became economic engines. The NFL's birth as a business was complete, though few could see it at the time. To the fans, it was still about the love of the game. To the players, it was still about proving worth. But for the owners, it was already about scale, strategy, and revenue. The scoreboard had changed. Wins and losses mattered, but so did profit margins. The future of football would no longer be decided solely on the field. The league's founders might have claimed they built a sport for the people, but the reality was starker. They built an institution where loyalty had a price tag and passion was a marketable commodity. The NFL's soul, once pure and untamed, was beginning its long negotiation with money. Every roar of the crowd was also an echo of a transaction. Every touchdown, a sale. The beauty of the game endured, but so did the business behind it. The two became inseparable. And as the decades rolled on, that early exchange between glory and greed would define everything the league became. By the time America reached the 1960s, football was no longer a weekend pastime fought out on muddy fields. It had become a national ritual, a shared pulse that connected households, cities, and generations through the glow of television screens. The transformation was as total as it was inevitable. The NFL, once sustained by local ticket sales and civic pride, had found its true power source: broadcast money. The game would never again belong solely to the fans in the stands. It now belonged to the networks that owned the airwaves. The story began with a single deal that changed everything. In 1962, the National Football League signed a contract with CBS worth $4.65 million. A staggering figure for the time. It was the first television agreement that bound all the teams under a unified broadcast package. Before that, each franchise had sold its own rights, creating chaos and imbalance. Larger markets like New York and Chicago thrived, while smaller ones struggled to survive. Commissioner Pete Rozelle, a former public relations man turned visionary executive, saw television not as a novelty, but as the engine that could drive the league into permanence. Rozelle's genius was recognizing that television wasn't just exposure, it was narrative. It was the ability to turn games into stories, players into icons, and moments into myth. By negotiating a national broadcast deal, he created a financial safety net that made every team, no matter how small, part of something bigger. The money was divided evenly among the clubs, ensuring parity, at least in theory, and giving every franchise a vested interest in collective success. the NFL became the rare professional league where cooperation fueled competition. But beneath that surface of unity lay a deeper truth. Television had taken control of the sport's destiny. Every decision, from kickoff times to camera angles, was made with the viewer in mind. Football evolved to suit the screen. The huddle became a moment of suspense. Slow motion turned collisions into poetry. The gridiron was no longer a battlefield, it was a stage. And on that stage, America found something it couldn't look away from. Violence dressed as beauty. Strategy wrapped in spectacle. The CBS deal gave the league financial security, but it also introduced dependence. The NFL's growth now relied on the whims of television executives, advertising budgets, and Nielsen ratings. What was once a game became a product calibrated for mass appeal. The roar of the stadium was replaced by the buzz of living rooms across the country. Sunday afternoon became sacred, not because of faith, but because of broadcast schedules. In 1967, another revolution sealed the league's fate: the birth of the Super Bowl. What began as a merger settlement between the rival NFL and AFL became the most profitable annual event in American sports. Super Bowl I, broadcast simultaneously on CBS and NBC, drew over 60 million viewers. It wasn't just a championship, it was a commercial showcase, a cultural moment, and a financial windfall. Companies paid to have their logos and slogans brushed against the sacred fabric of competition. The game of football had entered the age of advertising. Television turned the NFL into mythology. It gave faces to helmets and voices to collisions. Players like Johnny Unitas, Bart Starr, and Joe Namath became household names, not because of box scores, but because of camera lenses. When Namath guaranteed a victory in Super Bowl III and delivered it, he wasn't just winning a football game, he was performing an act of American theater. The media crowned him a rebel hero, and the league's executives understood immediately that personality could sell as effectively as performance. By the 1970s, networks were competing fiercely for broadcast rights. ABC entered the scene with Monday Night Football, an audacious idea that turned a weekly game into primetime drama. With Howard Cosell's sharp commentary, Frank Gifford's polish, and Don Meredith's Southern wit, football became entertainment television, part sport, part soap opera, part national mirror. Millions tuned in not only to watch touchdowns, but to witness the spectacle itself. The league's revenues soared, and television money began to dictate the rhythm of the season. Games were rescheduled, playoff formats adjusted, and kickoff times tweaked, all to accommodate television's demands. The players noticed, but they had little power to resist. The networks wrote the checks, and the league wrote the rules. The power dynamic was clear. Football's authenticity was valuable only insofar as it could be packaged and sold. The networks owned the story, and the league became its greatest narrator. Television didn't just change how the game was seen, it changed how it was played. Coaches began designing offenses that looked better on camera, favoring deep passes and big plays over grinding drives. Stadiums installed better lighting not for the players, but for the cameras. Even the uniforms grew bolder, more distinctive, perfect for color television. What mattered most was visibility, literal and figurative. The NFL was no longer just competing against other sports. It was competing against every other form of entertainment for America's attention. The league's revenue exploded in lockstep with viewership. By the end of the 1970s, television contracts were worth hundreds of millions. The NFL had become the single most valuable property on American television. Yet with that prosperity came compromise. The league now had two masters: the pursuit of competition and the pursuit of ratings. When the two collided, ratings almost always won. The Players' Union, still in its infancy, began to recognize that the flood of money was not reaching the locker room. Owners justified it by claiming they were protecting the league's long-term stability. But the truth was that television profits cemented a hierarchy. Those who controlled the rights controlled the power. Every camera angle, every replay, Every advertisement reinforced that reality. Television also brought exposure to the darker realities of the game. Slow motion revealed the violence in haunting detail, the crunch of helmets, the twist of limbs. Yet, instead of confronting the brutality, the league and the networks learned to aestheticize it. They turned pain into poetry. The same collisions that shattered bodies became the moments fans celebrated in highlight reels. The players absorbed the cost. The networks reaped the reward. The 1960s CBS deal had begun as a visionary experiment. By the end of the 1970s, it had evolved into an empire. Football was now inseparable from television, and television was inseparable from advertising. The symbiosis was perfect. The league supplied the drama, the network supplied the audience, and the sponsors supplied the money. Every touchdown, every replay, every halftime show existed within that triangle of profit. What was lost in the process was subtle but profound. The intimacy of the game, the closeness between fans and players began to fade. Television made football larger than life, but also more distant. The players became celebrities rather than neighbors. The fans became consumers rather than participants. And the league, once a patchwork of local passions, became a centralized corporation orchestrating the nation's attention. By the end of the television revolution, football had become America's defining broadcast, a living drama that mirrored the country's ambition, its appetite for power, and its willingness to commodify anything sacred. The game that had once been built on sweat and spirit was now measured in ratings, points, and advertising slots. The NFL had found its golden grip, a partnership with television that brought it glory, wealth, and permanence. But in that embrace, it also surrendered something essential. From that moment on, every decision would be filtered through one question: how will it look on TV? Power. It's not something you see on the field, but you can feel it in every broadcast, every contract, every camera angle. The NFL isn't just a game, it's an empire. And like any empire, its rulers aren't the men in helmets or even the coaches on the sidelines. They're the owners, billionaires who learn that in modern America, domination doesn't come from winning on Sundays. It comes from controlling what happens every other day of the week. By the late 20th century, football was already America's most watched sport. But what turned it into a global financial machine was ownership that understood two things: exclusivity and leverage. The men who sat in the luxury suites realized the league itself could act like one massive corporation, with 32 franchises not as competitors but as shareholders. The playing field was just a stage for a larger performance: monopoly through unity. Jerry Jones embodies that transformation. When he bought the Dallas Cowboys in 1989, he didn't just inherit a team, he acquired a brand waiting to be weaponized. Jones was part oilman, part showman, and entirely visionary. He understood that the Cowboys star wasn't just a logo, it was intellectual property. And he was about to let the NFL's central office tell him how to sell it. Within years, Jones shattered the league's old model by signing independent sponsorship deals for a TNT stadium, Pepsi, and Nick sidestepping league-controlled contracts and daring the commissioner to stop him. The lawsuits flew, but Jones won, and his victory reshaped the financial DNA of the league forever. He turned the Cowboys into the world's most valuable sports franchise, but his real achievement was ideological. He proved that an NFL owner could act as a sovereign state, rich enough and bold enough to challenge the league itself. The result was a quiet civil war among billionaires. Some saw Jones as a visionary, others as a threat. But even his critics began copying his playbook. By the 2000s, every major owner wanted what Jones had: autonomy, branding power, and leverage over television networks. Before Jones, Al Davis had already written a rough draft of Rebellion. The founder of the Raiders was football's dark prophet, defiant, brilliant, and perpetually in conflict with authority. He didn't build stadiums of glass and steel. He built a cult. Black uniforms, silver helmets, and an attitude that said, "Us against the world." Davis didn't just own a team. Kay crafted an identity that appealed to every outcast and outsider who needed something to believe in. But what truly defined Al Davis wasn't marketing, it was his war with the NFL itself. When the league refused to approve his move from Oakland to Los Angeles in 1982, Davis sued. He took the NFL to court and won. It was unprecedented, a single owner defeating the commissioner in federal court. It was also a sign that the old balance of power was over. The owners had realized they could fight the league and still survive. Davis had cracked open the door that Jerry Jones would later kick wide open. From there, the ownership class evolved into something bigger than sportsmen. They became industrialists of spectacle. Robert Kraft turned the New England Patriots into a blueprint for synergy between on-field dominance and off-field business acumen. His partnership with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick wasn't just about championships, it was about brand coherence. The Patriot Way became corporate culture disguised as sports philosophy. Stan Kroenke went further. His empire wasn't limited to football. He owned teams across leagues and continents, Arsenal in the Premier League, the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Avalanche, and built his NFL jewel SoFi Stadium as a monument to cross-branding, entertainment, and urban transformation. It wasn't just a venue, it was a statement of intent. That the NFL could rival Hollywood itself for control of America's attention. Every empire needs infrastructure, and the owners understood that television was their Great Wall. In 1961, Congress passed the Sports Broadcasting Act, granting the NFL the right to negotiate national TV contracts on behalf of all teams. What that meant was simple: collective bargaining for monopoly profit. By centralizing media deals, the owners removed their own internal competition for television dollars. The networks didn't negotiate with 32 separate teams, they negotiated with a cartel. Decades later, those same owners would use that law to secure multi-billion-dollar streaming partnerships with Amazon, YouTube, and ESPN. Each new contract wasn't just a revenue source, it was a demonstration of control. Even Congress, which once regulated sports broadcasting, now found itself powerless before an empire too economically essential to challenge. And yet, beneath the suits and shareholder meetings, a shadow persisted. The owner's empire was built not on equality, but exclusivity. Expansion franchises cost billions. Stadium deals required public funding. And fan loyalty, once organic, became a commodity to be packaged and sold. The game that began in dusty college fields now lived in air-conditioned fortresses, financed by taxpayers and owned by billionaires. The irony was sharp. The more money the league made, the less control its fans had over the sport they loved. Local traditions disappeared under global branding. Historic stadiums were demolished for luxury boxes. And ticket prices climbed so high that attending a live game became an event for the wealthy elite. But the owners didn't see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as visionaries safeguarding the league's future. When questioned about billion-dollar stadium subsidies, they spoke of economic development. When players demanded higher wages or better health care, they spoke of fiscal responsibility. And when fans protested relocation decisions from St. Louis to Los Angeles, from Oakland to Las Vegas, they called it strategic market realignment. The empire always had its justification ready, but its real strength lay in unity. No owner, no matter how rebellious, wanted to tear down the league that made them billionaires. They fought, sued, and bickered, but always came back to the same table, counting the same money. Behind every draft pick, every rule change, every broadcast partnership, there's a boardroom of men deciding the direction of a sport that millions believe belongs to them. It's the illusion of democracy, wrapped in the machinery of monopoly. Because in truth, the NFL doesn't operate like a league, it operates like a trust. Teams can lose, but the league never does. Revenues are shared, profits are distributed, and losses are minimized by design. The owner's empire isn't about competition. It's about coordination. And yet, for all their control, the empire remains vulnerable to its own excess. Stadium deals can sour, lawsuits can resurface, public sentiment can shift. As America itself wrestles with questions of inequality and power, so too does its most beloved sport. Because the same forces that built this empire, money, control, and spectacle, are the same ones that could one day destabilize it. In the end, the NFL's greatest paradox is this: it sells chaos on the field while perfecting order off it. Every tackle, every interception, every moment of unpredictability serves a system designed to be anything but unpredictable. And as long as fans keep watching, the owner's empire will keep expanding its walls, invisible but impenetrable. Because in the modern NFL, the scoreboard isn't measured in points, it's measured in ownership equity. Fame is supposed to be the reward, the payoff for all those bruises, all those winters in empty stadiums, all the pain nobody sees. But in the NFL, fame has a price tag. The cost is rarely measured in dollars. It's counted in broken bodies, fractured minds, and the quiet collapse that follows the cheers. The league sells success like it's eternal. Every draft night, every highlight reel, every sponsorship ad promises glory that will last forever. But behind that illusion lies a machine built to burn through human beings. The players who rise fastest often fall hardest because the NFL doesn't teach them how to live, it teaches them how to perform. And performance, in this world, is everything. From the moment a player signs his first contract, he becomes a brand. His value isn't measured by character or resilience, it's quantified by statistics, endorsements, and screen time. The million-dollar deal that looks like salvation is often the start of a silent countdown. Because in the NFL, most careers are over in less than 4 years. The body breaks, the phone stops ringing, and the cameras move on. For every Tom Brady, there are 100 men whose names never made it past preseason. They trained their entire lives for a dream that barely lasted 1 season. And when it ends, the system doesn't come back for them. There's no re-entry plan, no safety net. Just a culture that says, next man up. It's easy to celebrate the legends, but the real story of money in football isn't told through record-breaking contracts, it's told through the players who lost everything chasing them. Take Vince Young. In 2006, he was supposed to be the future of the Heisman finalist, the charismatic leader who could change the game. The Tennessee Titans made him a multimillionaire overnight. But within a few years, the pressures of expectation, media scrutiny, and financial mismanagement consumed him. By 2014, Young had earned over $30 million and filed for bankruptcy. He wasn't lazy or reckless, he was overwhelmed. Friends became advisors, advisors became exploiters, and the money vanished faster than he could understand where it went. Or consider Terrell Owens, one of the most talented receivers to ever touch the field. He played with the fire of a man who needed to be seen, needed to be loved, but also needed to prove something deeper to himself, to the game, to a world that never quite gave him peace. Owens earned more than $80 million across his career, yet ended up publicly admitting to financial ruin. His story wasn't about bad spending. It was about emotional isolation. When the league no longer needed him, there was nothing left but silence. That silence is the part no one wants to talk about. When the stadium lights go off, players are left with the aftershocks of a life built around adrenaline and structure. For years, everything is planned schedules, diets, workouts, game film, travel. Then one day, it all stops. The discipline that once defined them becomes emptiness. And for many, the physical pain doesn't end when the career does. The hits they took for applause turn into lifelong agony. Concussions, chronic pain, depression. The league doesn't write those into the contracts. For some, it's too much to bear. Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was known as Iron Mike. He anchored one of the greatest dynasties in football history. But by the end of his life, Webster was living out of his truck, suffering from dementia caused by repeated head trauma. He was one of the first documented cases of chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTI), disease that would later expose the NFL's darkest secret, that the human brain isn't built for this game. The same league that glorified toughness spent years denying the link between concussions and long-term neurological damage. While billion-dollar TV deals rolled in, former players were dying in obscurity, forgotten by the system that made them heroes. When the lawsuits came, the NFL settled for hundreds of millions, but money couldn't buy back what was lost. Even those who survive physically often crumble emotionally. The transition from star athlete to ordinary citizen is a fall few can prepare for. Imagine being 28, 30 years old, and realizing the best years of your life are already behind you. The fame that once protected you now traps you. The money that once empowered you now isolates you. Because wealth in the NFL doesn't just elevate, it alienates. Players are told they're invincible until the day they're not. The locker room teaches loyalty, but the business teaches betrayal. Agents leave when the contracts dry up. Brands stop calling. Old teammates become strangers. And the fans who once screamed your name forget it within a season. In that emptiness, many turn to dangerous escape substances, gambling, self-destruction. For some, the violence of the field never leaves them. Studies show former NFL players are 4 times more likely to develop mental health issues related to impulse control and depression. Yet for decades, the league treated such cases as personal failings rather than systemic consequences. Even the superstars can't escape the pressure. Antonio Brown, for instance, was once a symbol of generational talento, 6th-round pick who fought his way to the top. But as the fame grew, so did the scrutiny. Every misstep, every outburst, every erratic moment became viral fodder for a culture addicted to controversy. Behind it all was a man unraveling in real time, a casualty of the same system that profited from his rise. Money amplifies everything, the triumphs, the insecurities, the madness. It gives players access to worlds they were never taught how to navigate. Suddenly, they're expected to manage empires, support families, and endure the constant demand to perform. And if they can't, they're replaced. Because in the NFL, emotion doesn't sell, performance does. There's a haunting truth buried beneath the glamour. Every paycheck is both a reward and a trap. The bigger the contract, the heavier the expectations. Fans see the numbers $50 million, $100 million, but they don't see the invisible contract that comes with it. Be perfect, be marketable, never show weakness. And for players, weakness is lethal. Show pain, and you lose your spot. Show emotion, and you're called unstable. So they bury it behind smiles, endorsements, and highlight reels, until one day it all comes crashing down. The NFL's economic miracle rests on the shoulders of men taught to silence their humanity. They are sold as warriors, yet expected to live as machines. And when they break, the world watches with curiosity, not compassion. But beneath the chaos, there's something deeply human about these men. They play because the game once gave them purpose. They endure because the field feels like the only place they ever belonged. And even when it costs them everything, they chase that feeling again and again, the roar of the crowd, the illusion of immortality. Because in the end, money can buy contracts, stadiums, even dynasties, but it can't buy peace. The players who built the NFL's empire learned that too late. The league may celebrate their highlights, but it rarely tells their full stories, the pain, the loneliness, the search for meaning once the checks stop coming. They were never just players. They were investments. And the return was measured not in happiness, but in profit margins. Every empire needs its generals. In the NFL, those generals wear headsets instead of armor, and their battlefields are lined with turf instead of trenches. But make no mistake, the coaches of this league have always been soldiers of order and control. They are the architects of discipline, the keepers of systems, the minds who turn chaos into choreography. Yet, beneath the whistle and the clipboard lies something darker, Crusade, that turned mentorship into power and strategy into domination. When the league was young, coaches were little more than caretakers of passion. In the 1920s and 30s, they taught fundamentals. Motivated men who worked factory jobs by day and played football by night. They didn't make much money, and they didn't chase fame. They taught football the way priests teach faith, with conviction, not currency. But as the sport evolved, so did the men who led it. They began to realize that control wasn't just about winning games, was about defining the very culture of the league. By the 1960s, one man stood above all others: Vince Lombardi. To his players, he was part philosopher, part tyrant, part prophet. Lombardi believed football was a moral test. He preached discipline as salvation, hard work as redemption. His Green Bay Packers became a reflection of his own will: rigid, relentless, unstoppable. "Winning isn't everything," he once said. "It's the only thing." Those words became the unofficial gospel of professional football. But that gospel came at a cost. Lombardi's teams were machines built for dominance, not empathy. Players pushed through injuries, ignored pain, and sacrificed families to meet his impossible standard. To him, pain was proof of devotion. Glory demanded suffering. And in the decades that followed, that belief hardened into the foundation of the NFL's identity. Every generation produced its own iteration of the Lombardi archetype. Don Shula built the Miami Dolphins into a dynasty of perfection, ruling with precision and pride. Chuck Noll sculpted the 1970s Steelers into warriors of steel and silence. Bill Walsh of the 1980s San Francisco 49ers turned the game into an art form. Using intellect as weaponry, creating systems so elegant they felt like poetry disguised as football. Each man contributed to a mythology. The coach as genius, the coach as God, the coach as the unflinching voice of authority. But somewhere along the way, the game changed. The sideline became less about leadership and more about image. Coaches were no longer simply tacticians. They became brands, symbols of philosophies that corporations could sell. The NFL learned how to market not just its players, but its leaders. The camera started to linger on the coach's face during tense moments, framing them as visionaries in command of the storm. When Bill Parcells barked on the sideline, it wasn't just intensity, it was theater. When Jimmy Johnson flashed his grin after a Dallas Cowboys win, it was charisma packaged for television. They became household names, almost as famous as the athletes they commanded. And as money flooded the league, the stakes for those holding the playbook skyrocketed. A head coach's salary that once barely covered a living now reached into the millions. Success could turn a man into an institution. Failure could erase him overnight. By the time the modern era arrived, the coach's role had morphed into something closer to corporate leadership. Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots embodied that transformation. To his players, he was a master strategist and a mystery. Emotionless, analytical, detached, he managed his team like a CEO manages a conglomerate. Every player became an interchangeable asset. Every game plan a reflection of ruthless efficiency. The Patriots dynasty wasn't just about talent, it was about control. Belichick built a machine where emotion was secondary to structure, and that machine produced results. But his empire also revealed the growing moral tension within the league. The more data, technology, and money entered football, the less human it became. Coaching evolved from gut instinct to algorithmic precision. Playbooks expanded into encyclopedias. Game planning became a science. And somewhere in that transformation, the heart of mentorship began to fade. For decades, coaches were father figures. They taught boys how to become men. Now, they're corporate strategists, teaching men how to become brands. That shift has changed everything: the locker room dynamic, the emotional pulse of the sport, even the language of leadership. Words like grit and heart have been replaced by metrics and execution. Andy Reid, one of the most respected coaches of the modern age, straddles that divide. To his players, he's known as both innovator and caretaker. He represents the balance that's nearly vanished, a reminder that you can win without losing your humanity. Under Reid, players like Patrick Mahomes thrive not just because of systems, but because of trust. But Reid is an exception in a world increasingly driven by the cold calculus of profit and efficiency. The dark irony is that while coaches preach team unity, their own survival depends on self-preservation. In the NFL, a coach can go from genius to scapegoat in a single season. Owners expect instant results. Fans demand perfection. And when failure comes, it's rarely shared that's assigned. Coaches get fired in public, humiliated on live television, dissected by analysts who never felt the pressure of calling a play on 4th and inches with a season on the line. The profession devours its own. It glorifies control but offers none. The average tenure of an NFL head coach is just over 3 years. Behind every sideline celebration lies a man who hasn't slept properly in months, whose marriage is on the brink, whose body is breaking under the weight of expectation. For all their authority, coaches are prisoners of the very system they help uphold. And yet, they keep coming back. Because for men like Lombardi, Belichick, Reid, or Tomlin, coaching isn't just a job, it's an identity. The sideline is their sanctuary. The roar of the crowd, their drug. They live for the rare moments when strategy meets destiny, when the chaos of football bends to their command. But this crusade for mastery has blurred the lines between leadership and obsession. Some coaches have turned the game into religion, demanding blind obedience from players who already give everything they have. Others have lost themselves in the endless grind, unable to separate victory from validation. And in that obsession lies the cost of glory. The same intensity that wins championships often destroys lives. Marriages collapse under the weight of endless hours. Health deteriorates under stress. And when the season ends, the silence feels unbearable. There's a story of one coach, anonymous by choice, who said that after being fired, he sat in his darkened office for hours, staring at his old playbooks, unable to leave. It felt like a death, he said. Because who am I without this? That question echoes through every locker room, every sideline, every practice field. The NFL may celebrate its champions, but it's built on men, players, and coaches alike who have given their identities to the game. The coach's crusade was never just about winning. It was about meaning. About controlling something in a world that never stops changing. But meaning is fragile in a league where loyalty is transactional. Today's coach is tomorrow's headline. The same owners who praise you for bringing order will replace you the moment that order slips. And so the crusade continues, relentless, consuming, fueled by the same paradox that defines the entire NFL, the pursuit of greatness, no matter the cost. The coaches came to build legacies. Instead, many built cages. In America, nothing becomes immortal until the media decides it should be. The NFL understood that truth earlier than any other sport. Somewhere between the black and white highlight reels of the 1950s and the HD slow-motion replays of today, the league stopped being just a competition, it became a story factory. The media didn't just cover football. It crowned kings, built myths, and created the illusion that every Sunday was sacred. The media machine didn't invent football's beauty, it monetized it. It took the violence, the pageantry, the heartbreak, and packaged them into stories that sold everything from beer to belief. Football was never just a game. It was America's reflection, projected onto millions of glowing screens. In the beginning, the coverage was simple. Radio announcers described the action with military precision. Each yard gained or lost like a chess move in a national ritual. But the moment television entered the picture, everything changed. The league's leadership understood what few others did. Emotion sells. and no sport delivered emotion like football. The sweat, the collisions, the triumph, all of it translated perfectly through the lens. The CBS television deal of the 1960s was the spark. For the first time, every home in America could see the brutality and beauty of the game in real time. Sunday afternoons became a kind of national gathering, one that transcended region, race, and class. The NFL wasn't just on TV. It was TV. And as audiences grew, so did the stakes. Television turned the game into theater, and every play became a plot twist. Narratives emerged: underdogs versus dynasties, heroes versus villains, legends in the making. The league learned that a good story was as valuable as a championship. A single catch, a fumble, a moment of controversy could dominate headlines for days. And soon, the stories became the product. By the 1970s, NFL Films turned that product into art. Founded by Ed and Steve Sabol, it transformed football coverage into cinematic mythology. With orchestral scores, slow-motion shots of helmets colliding, and gravel-voiced narration, NFL Films didn't just record games, it canonized them. It gave football the gravitas of ancient war epics, the emotional resonance of opera. Every touchdown looked heroic, every loss tragic. The league became a living legend. But behind the legend was a contract, a silent exchange between the NFL and the media. The league provided drama. The networks provided worship. Together, they built a spectacle too big to question. And as advertising money flooded in, journalism began to blur into marketing. Sports reporters became storytellers for hire. They weren't just describing the game, they were selling it. The line between coverage and promotion dissolved, replaced by partnership. Major networks invested billions to secure broadcast rights, effectively becoming business partners in the very league they were supposed to critique. And the result? The NFL became untouchable. By the 1980s, with ESPN's rise, football turned into a 24-hour economy of attention. Talk shows, highlight loops, pre-game panels, all of it designed to keep the audience consuming. Players' private lives became public property. Every rumor was a headline, every quote, a weapon. The media didn't just report what happened, dictated what mattered. When a player knelt in protest, the story wasn't about justice, it was about ratings. When a concussion scandal broke, the narrative was managed, softened, and reframed. Even tragedy became content. The machine was too profitable to pause. In 1989, when the NFL signed a billion-dollar deal that split games between multiple networks, it became clear the league had evolved into the most powerful entertainment enterprise in America. The Super Bowl became a national holiday where the commercials were just as anticipated as the touchdowns. The halftime show, once a marching band performance, became a multi-million-dollar spectacle featuring the world's biggest artists. The game was now just one part of the show, and every piece of it was monetized. Media outlets fed on every morsel of drama. Contract disputes, locker room feuds, retirements, comebacks, it was all narrative gold. The league didn't need to manufacture scandal. It simply needed to curate it. The storylines kept fans hooked, kept advertisers investing, kept America talking. But somewhere in that process, truth became negotiable. The same networks that profited from the NFL's image rarely challenged its ethics. When the concussion crisis began to surface in the early 2000s, coverage was timid. When domestic violence cases involving players made headlines, commentary was often diluted by fear of losing access. For the media, access meant money. Criticism meant exile. The relationship became symbiotic, toxic. The league needed the media to build mythology. The media needed the league to sell content. Together, they formed an echo chamber where glory always outweighed guilt. The machine didn't just shape how fans saw the game, it shaped how players saw themselves. Fame became currency. Endorsements became identity. A highlight on Monday Night Football could change a life overnight, turning a man into a household name. But it also created pressure no human could sustain. Every misstep, every dropped pass, every personal failure was magnified, replayed, and analyzed by millions. For many, the psychological weight was unbearable. Players became addicted to visibility. They feared silence more than pain. As one retired receiver once said, when the cameras stop following you, it feels like you stop existing. And the machine fed on that fear. It turned personal tragedy into narrative arcs. When a player overdosed, the coverage wasn't about the man, it was about the storyline. When a legend died young, the eulogies ran between beer commercials. By the 2010s, the NFL wasn't just America's favorite sport. That was its dominant cultural language. The league's media empire spanned cable networks, streaming platforms, and social media ecosystems. Every click, every share, every fantasy football stat reinforced the illusion that the NFL was untouchable, eternal, inevitable. But the machine has a cost. It rewards spectacle over substance, controversy over compassion. It thrives on constant noise, leaving no room for silence, reflection, or accountability. The same media that builds heroes destroys them just as fast because redemption, too, sells. For the fans, this spectacle feels like participation. But for those inside it, the players, the coaches, even the journalists, it feels like captivity. Every word is a headline, every gesture a statement. Authenticity becomes performance. And the league, always watching, always managing, ensures that the story remains clean enough to sell. The NFL's media empire stands today as both its crown and its cage. It created legends, but silenced truths. It gave players fame, but stripped them of privacy. It gave America something to believe in, but it also blurred the line between sport and propaganda. The lights, the commentary. The endless analysis, all of it, masks a deeper question. When the story becomes more important than the truth, who's really in control? Because beneath the noise, the game still exists, the raw, unfiltered struggle that once made it pure. But that purity is buried under layers of production, profit, and illusion. And somewhere, amid the soundbites and highlight reels, the heart of football still beats faint, but defiant, waiting to be heard again. The stadium has always been more than concrete and steel. It's a cathedral for noise, memory, and money. The one place where the NFL feels immortal. But when I walk through the corridors of these billion-dollar arenas, long after the crowd is gone, I realize something chilling. The game isn't the same anymore. The heartbeat that once echoed through old bleachers has been replaced by corporate hum, luxury suites, LED screens, and the low throb of an economy built on spectacle. In the early days, the stadium was humble. A few thousand fans packed into wooden bleachers, bundled in coats against the cold, standing shoulder to shoulder with players' families. Town fields in Green Bay, Canton, or Pottsville felt like community gatherings, not national events. There were no skyboxes, no branding banners, no personal seat licenses, only the raw purity of the game. The people who showed up weren't customers. They were believers. Everything began to change in the 1960s when football realized it could sell more than tickets. It could sell experiences. Cities began competing to host teams, and public money became the silent partner in this transformation. Mayors promised economic booms, while owners whispered about loyalty to the fans. Yet loyalty had a price tag. Municipalities financed new coliseums with taxpayer dollars, believing that if you build it, the team and the money would stay. But that was never a guarantee. The move from communal stadiums to commercial empires began subtly. The old Metropolitan Stadium in Minnesota gave way to the Metrodome, then to US Bank Stadium. Each one more spectacular, more expensive, and less personal. Los Angeles lost the Rams once, only to lure them back decades later with a promise written in glass and LED: SoFi Stadium, a $5 billion shrine to capitalism disguised as sport. I stood there once after a game when the field was empty and the air still carried the echo of cheering. The silence afterward felt holy, but hollow, like standing in a church where no one believes anymore. Each new stadium is sold as progress. Bigger screens, better seats, faster Wi-Fi. But hidden beneath the marketing gloss are the taxpayers who foot the bill. The promise of economic revitalization rarely arrives. Studies show that most stadiums drain public funds instead of replenishing them, leaving cities burdened with debt while owners walk away wealthier. The illusion works because it's wrapped in civic pride. Cities convince themselves that having a team means having importance, that the skyline isn't complete without a glowing NFL logo burning above it. But behind those glowing letters are deals written in fine print. Take the example of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. $1.6 billion in total cost, with nearly half coming from public financing. Or Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, where hotel taxes covered the majority of its $1.9 billion price tag. These are temples of modern America, funded by the public, owned by billionaires, and branded by corporations. The field may belong to the players, but the power sits in the luxury suites far above the roar of the crowd. And still, we cheer. Because the stadium isn't just a building, it's emotion made physical. When 70,000 fans rise in unison, something primal stirs. The air vibrates with memory, unity, hope. For a moment, no one cares about the economics of it all. That's the power of illusion. You can feel robbed and grateful at the same time. You can curse the ownership for charging $500 a seat while still whispering, "This is home." In cities like Buffalo or Cleveland, where decades pass without championships, the stadium becomes part of local identity, sacred ground in a life of struggle. Fans hand down season tickets like family heirlooms. They forgive everything. Losing seasons, bad trades, even betrayals by management. Because stepping inside that structure feels like belonging to something larger than yourself. Owners know this. They build bigger, flashier arenas, not because they must, but because they can. The people will come. They always do. Yet there's another truth hidden behind those bright lights. The players who built those legacies rarely get to share in the empire they helped create. The men who bled on concrete turf in the 1970s now watch from home as their teams play in palaces. Many can't afford a ticket to the house that their pain built. Some, like Jim Otto or Earl Campbell, struggle to walk reminders that the cost of progress is often paid in silence. I think about the old footage of Lambeau Field covered in snow, fans bundled in wool blankets, players slipping on frozen ground. The crowd wasn't distracted by massive screens or corporate ads. They watched the game, not the show. That intimacy is gone now. Stadiums today are controlled environments, climate-regulated, sound-engineered, sanitized for consumption. The game still happens, but it's almost secondary. The modern fan is both participant and product. Even the architecture reflects the league's soul. Early stadiums were built for endurance, stone, steel, and simplicity. Now they're designed for television. Every angle, every camera placement, every light fixture engineered for the broadcast lens. The field is no longer a battleground. It's a stage. The players, performers. The crowd, the applause track. And when the lights go down and the parking lot's empty, the illusion stands tall, silent, and proud, waiting for the next Sunday sacrifice. There's beauty in it, of course. Standing inside an empty arena before kickoff feels like touching the edge of a myth. The smell of turf, the hum of anticipation, it's intoxicating. But once you understand the machinery behind it all, the magic starts to unravel. Every chant echoes with a price. Every touchdown is followed by a commercial. Every inch of that stadium, from the field to the bathrooms, has been monetized. The soul of the sport exists somewhere between nostalgia and negotiation. The owners will tell you it's progress. The league will call it innovation. The fans will keep coming, and the cameras will keep rolling. But I can't help thinking that somewhere in all the noise, the game itself got smaller, dwarfed by the empire that surrounds it. And when I look up at those massive screens replaying moments of glory, I see something else reflected back. Our collective willingness to trade authenticity for grandeur. The stadium was supposed to be the house of the game. Now it's the monument to everything that replaced it. They say the NFL runs on passion, but it really runs on partnerships. Once, the only logo that mattered was the one on the helmet. Now, it's the ones lining the sidelines. Pepsi, Verizon, Gatorade, Nike, Amazon, DraftKings. Every square inch of the modern NFL has a price tag. Every moment, a sponsor. Somewhere along the line, football stopped being a game and became a brand ecosystem. It didn't happen overnight. The first whispers came in the 1970s, when corporations realized that millions of fans weren't just watching football, they were buying it. TV audiences were growing, and the NFL's reach was unrivaled. A soda company could spend a few million on an ad during Monday night football and move product across the entire country by Thursday. The league saw the power of its own stage, and what began as sideline banners soon became a symphony of logos woven into the DNA of the game. By the 1980s, the NFL had transformed into a sponsorship machine. Official beer, official car, official razor. There was an official brand for everything. Players drank from branded cups, coaches wore branded gear, and broadcasters spoke in sponsored sentences. The line between the game and the commercial break blurred until they were indistinguishable. The Super Bowl wasn't just the biggest game of the year. It was a marketing altar. A national ritual where 30 seconds of airtime could cost more than a player's annual salary. I remember watching old footage of Vince Lombardi standing on the frozen sidelines, coat flapping, face carved by the wind. There were no flashing banners behind him, no corporate logos crowding his world. Just football. Compare that to today. Sideline reporters framed by 10 different brand logos. Every replay brought to you by someone selling something. The NFL learned that authenticity sells, but only when it's packaged correctly. Corporate partnerships became lifelines. Stadium names were sold to the highest bidder. From Heinz Field to Acrisure Stadium. From the RCA Dome to Lucas Oil. Tradition became negotiable. Fans didn't cheer for names anymore. They adapted to them. The shift was subtle, but powerful. Loyalty migrated from team to brand. You didn't just drink a beer. You drank the official beer of your team. You didn't just wear a jersey. You wore the logo that the league wanted you to. In 2018, the NFL signed deals with sports betting companies after years of publicly denouncing gambling. Billboards that once warned players not to associate with bookmakers were replaced by neon ads promoting in-game parlays. The message was clear. What was once a threat to integrity became a revenue stream. Even morality, it seemed, was for sale. The price just hadn't been right before. But it's not just about money. It's about narrative control. Sponsorships don't just fund the league. They shape what fans see and what they don't. Corporations don't sponsor controversy. They sponsor image. When concussions dominated headlines, sponsors leaned on the league to restore trust. When protests spread across the field, some brands threatened to pull ads. The league didn't just answer to its owners anymore. It answered to its advertisers. There's an invisible choreography behind every Sunday broadcast. Camera angles designed to maximize ad placement. On-screen graphics that merge the play clock with sponsor logos. Timeout schedules dictated by commercial pacing. Even halftime performances are more brand campaign than celebration. It's a world where football is the medium, not the message, and the message is consumption. Yet, the players still carry the weight of authenticity. Their sweat, their sacrifice, their risk, that's the product. They're what gives the illusion its credibility. And so long as they keep giving everything on the field, the rest of us keep buying the dream. Because no matter how many logos flood the screen, the human drama still cuts through. The player who fights through injury. The underdog who beats the odds. Those moments feel pure. But even purity in this system is monetized. It's edited into highlight reels, sold to advertisers, and repackaged for social media. Sometimes I think about the irony that the same companies sponsoring the sports of violence are the ones selling the remedies. Beer brands promote the very culture that breaks bodies. Insurance companies sponsor the league that leaves players fighting for coverage. Energy drink logos flash beside concussion warnings. The contradictions aren't hidden, they're normalized. That's the genius of the modern NFL economy, to turn even hypocrisy into profit. I've spoken to retired players who remember when endorsement deals were rare, even suspicious. "You were a football player," one told me, "not a billboard." But for today's stars, branding is survival. Image is currency. A player's Instagram feed is as valuable as his yardage. When a rookie enters the league, he's taught not just plays, but public relations, how to become marketable, how to represent the shield. The league doesn't just create athletes, it manufactures brands. And it's not that these players don't deserve the wealth they do. They've earned every cent of it with their bodies and their brilliance. But the structure surrounding them is built to keep ownership of the narrative firmly in the league's hands. The NFL's sponsorship empire is a modern-day feudal system. Players are the knights, risking everything on the battlefield, while the lords above collect tribute from every battle fought. When I think about the soul of football, that electric sacred space between player and fan, I can't help wondering what happens when every inch of that connection is mediated by commerce. The jerseys, the replays, even the emotional arcs are now branded experiences. The game sells more than touchdowns, it sells identity. The NFL is no longer just part of American culture. It is American culture capitalism, competitiveness, and contradiction wrapped in one. Maybe that's why the roar still feels real. Because it's built on something deeper than money. It's built on memory. Fans remember what it used to be like. They project that feeling onto every new logo, every glossy ad, every stadium chant. That's what keeps the illusion alive. But when the lights dim, when the cameras shut off and the last logo fades from the screen, a question lingers in the quiet. If everything is for sale, what's left to believe in? They called it the Great Equalizer, the mechanism that would bring balance to the chaos of competition, a safeguard against dynasties, greed, and dominance. The salary cap was supposed to make the league fair. But in truth, it became one of the most ingenious tools of control the NFL ever designed. When the cap was introduced in 1994, it arrived draped in optimism. The story was simple. Every team, big or small, would have the same financial limit on player salaries. It would force parity, reward strategy, and prevent rich owners from buying championships. On paper, it sounded like justice. In reality, it was an economic illusion, one that reshaped not just contracts, but careers, loyalty, and legacy. The league framed the salary cap as a victory for fairness, but what it really did was cement ownership's grip on power. Every dollar became a negotiation of hierarchy. Players were no longer simply paid for their talent. They were priced according to a mathematical formula, an invisible ledger that dictated their worth before they even stepped onto the field. It was capitalism at its most clinical, emotional, physical, and financial sacrifice reduced to a spreadsheet. I remember Reggie White, one of the greatest defensive ends in history, standing at the heart of the 1993 free agency revolution. His case against the NFL shattered decades of owner collusion and opened the door to modern free agency. But the victory was bittersweet. The system that followed the cap era gave players more movement. Yes, but within boundaries designed by the very power they'd challenged. Freedom came with strings attached. The salary cap didn't just regulate spending. It redefined the value of humanity within the sport. Every decision became transactional. A player's injury wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cap hit. A rookie's rise wasn't just a story, it was a bargain deal, behind every touchdown, every cut, every extension. There was an accountant's calculation whispering in the background. Does he fit within the limit? The numbers dictated emotion. Coaches were forced to think like financiers. Fans, unknowingly, became shareholders in the drama of budget management. Sports talk shifted from heart to economics cap space. Dead money, restructure. The language of the game turned corporate, sterile, analytical. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about balancing the books while pretending the playing field was equal. And yet, parity worked, or at least it appeared to. The cap era produced more playoff diversity, more Cinderella stories, more moments where the impossible seemed possible. But if you peeled back the curtain, you saw that true power never changed hands. The richest owners still built the most lavish facilities. They still wielded influence in media, in politics, in the boardroom. They could manipulate the cap through bonuses, creative accounting, and future guarantees. The illusion of equality became its own kind of spectacle. Consider the New England Patriots' 6 Super Bowl titles in the cap era. Their dynasty wasn't built on unchecked spending, but on precision, underpaying key veterans, drafting shrewdly, restructuring deals. Bill Belichick mastered the economics of control, using the cap as a weapon. While other teams blamed limitations, New England thrived within them. The message was clear. Success belonged to those who understood the system, not those who resisted it. But for players, the consequences were harsh. The cap meant that loyalty was expendable. Beloved veterans were released not because they declined, but because their contracts no longer fit. Careers that should have ended with honor ended with headlines about cap casualties. Men who had built legacies found themselves cut overnight, their contributions erased by a ledger line. There's a cruel poetry in it. How a league that glorifies sacrifice has no room for sentiment. The same game that celebrates heroism on Sunday calculates its erasure on Monday. In 2011, when the players' union clashed with owners during the lockout, the truth became undeniable. The cap wasn't about fairness, it was about preservation of control. Billionaires fought to limit growth, to maintain their margins, to ensure that no matter how large the NFL's empire grew, the distribution of wealth stayed predictable. The players could fight for a bigger slice, but the pie was always pre-cut. Tom Brady, one of the most visible faces of the cap era, often restructured his contracts to help the team. It was celebrated as selflessness. But beneath the narrative was a system that glorified financial compromise while masking ownership's vast profitability. Players were praised for taking less while the league quietly expanded into a $20 billion enterprise. The salary cap didn't stop greed, it managed it. Even today, the system's fingerprints are everywhere. Rookie wage scales limit earning power from day one. Franchise tags trap elite players in one-year contracts, sold to fans as a gesture of loyalty, but designed as control. The freedom of movement that defines other industries is an illusion here, confined within financial boundaries that favor the top. I've spoken with players who describe the emotional toll of the cap era. They said it turned the locker room into an economy. Friendships became fragile. A teammate's raise could cost another his job. Every celebration carried a shadow. Every contract announcement rippled through the roster like a quiet storm. Behind the brotherhood was a constant awareness. Numbers decide everything. The irony is that the salary cap was meant to prevent greed from consuming the sport. But greed simply adapted. It learned to speak the language of fairness, to wear the mask of balance. It became data-driven, calculated, and justified. The system that was supposed to make the league more human made it more mechanical instead. When the fans look at their teams, they see stories of strategy and sacrifice. They don't see the spreadsheets, the late-night calls, the human cost of financial maneuvering. They see loyalty until the next trade. They see heroes until the next cut. And through it all, the league stands proud, selling the illusion that everyone has a fair chance. But fairness, like the cap itself, has limits. It's an agreement built on belief, a promise that as long as the numbers add up, the game remains pure. And so the machine keeps running, efficient, profitable, and cold. Because in the NFL's empire, even equality has a price tag. The war between players and owners didn't start in courtrooms or at negotiation tables. It started in the quiet, frustrated minds of men who knew they were risking their bodies for less than what the game was taking from them. By the 1970s, football wasn't just a sport. It was a billion-dollar spectacle built on the bones of players who had no guaranteed contracts, no free agency, and almost no control over their own lives. The fans saw heroes in helmets, but behind closed doors, those heroes were fighting for basic rights. I remember the tension that began to thicken like fog around the league in those years. The players were organizing something unthinkable in the early decades. The NFL Players Association was small, underfunded, and fragmented at first. But it represented a spark of rebellion in a sport that had long been ruled like a monarchy. The owners, men with generational wealth and political connections, weren't about to hand over control. The battlefield wasn't on the field any. It was in the locker rooms, boardrooms, and, soon enough, the courts. The 1970s brought names like John Mackey, the Baltimore Colts' legendary tight end. He wasn't just a Hall of Famer, he was the first real labor leader in NFL history. Mackey took on the establishment, pushing for pensions, better insurance, and the right to choose where players could play once contracts expired. The owners treated him like a traitor. The league blacklisted him quietly after his retirement, cutting ties, denying honors, freezing him out of the world he helped shape. But his courage built the foundation of modern player rights. When you look back, it's almost poetic how the same sport that thrived on teamwork had such a fractured relationship between its own members and management. In 1974, the NFLPA staged its first major strike, demanding improved benefits and salaries. It didn't last long. The owners stood firm, using replacement players and threatening to void contracts. The strike collapsed within weeks, and many players returned, defeated and fearful. But the seed had been planted. Every lost paycheck, every injury without compensation, every veteran who retired broke it, all added fuel to the movement. Then came 1982. By then, football was television's crown jewel, and players knew the value they brought to the screen. They walked out again, this time better organized, demanding a fair share of revenue. The strike lasted 57 days. Stadiums stood empty, networks scrambled for filler programming, and fans grew restless. The owners once again refused to bend, but when play resumed, something had shifted in the public eye. For the first time, many fans began to see players not as greedy, but as exploited. They saw the human costs behind the helmets. It wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. The average NFL career was less than 4 years. One torn ligament, one concussion, and a man's livelihood could vanish overnight. And when it did, the league offered little more than a handshake and a medical bill. The players wanted security. They wanted power. And in the 1980s, that power came closer than ever. In 1987, the NFL faced its most dramatic confrontation yet. Another strike, this one lasting 24 days, introduced a new weapon for the owners. Replacement players. Men from semi-pro leagues, even ex-athletes from other sports, were brought in to fill rosters. The games went on, but they felt hollow. Stadiums were half empty. The quality of play dipped. If the owners played a long game, they knew that time and financial strain would break the strikers, and it did. Many players crossed picket lines, torn between loyalty and necessity. Some were vilified by their peers. Others, like Joe Montana, returned reluctantly, realizing the futility of the standoff. The strike ended in defeat once again, but its aftermath was more important than its result. The players had learned the hard way that solidarity was their greatest weapon, and that weapon would soon be sharpened in court. By the early 1990s, free agency had become the holy grail. For decades, players were bound by the Rizal rule, which gave the commissioner power to demand compensation from any team signing a free agent, essentially killing free movement. Players like Reggie White and Freeman McNeil challenged that system, arguing it was an illegal restraint of trade. The case McNeil v. NFL became a landmark moment. In 1992, a federal jury sided with the players. The ruling cracked open the gates that had held them captive for generations. That verdict didn't just change contracts, it changed the balance of power. Suddenly, star players could test the market. Teams had to compete for talent, and salaries skyrocketed. Reggie White, in particular, became the symbol of the new era when he signed with the Green Bay Packers in 1993 as one of the first true free agents. It was liberation in pads. But freedom came with a cost. The owners, fearing chaos and inflated spending, fought back with the concept of a salary cap. The 1993 collective bargaining agreement introduced both free agency and the cap, a compromise that reshaped the league. The cap was supposed to preserve parity, keeping small market teams competitive. Yet, in truth, it also preserved owner profit margins. The war hadn't ended, had evolved. Still, the players had finally secured a share of the revenue, roughly 57% under that first CBA. They had won pensions, injury protections, and a voice in league policy. For the first time, they were partners, not property. But if history teaches anything, it's that balance in the NFL never lasts. The early 2000s brought new tensions. The business of football was exploding: TV rights, merchandise, sponsorships, global branding. The money was staggering, and so were the disputes over who deserved how much. In 2011, the cracks reopened. The owners opted out of the existing labor deal, locking out players for 132 days. Once again, stadiums went silent. The lockout wasn't a strike. It was a strategic siege. The owners wanted to reduce player revenue share, increase the regular season, and tighten rookie pay. The NFLPA decertified itself as a union to file an antitrust lawsuit against the league, a high-stakes chess move. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Drew Brees became the faces of the fight. Their names on the lawsuit that symbolized a new generation of leadership. The case, Brady v. NFL, ended in another compromise. The players kept much of their revenue share. The season stayed at 16 games for the time being, and rookie contracts were capped to control spending. The agreement extended through 2020, bringing temporary peace to a battlefield that never truly quiets. When the next round of negotiations came, the league had already become a global empire. Yet the tension between labor and management never disappeared, just changed form. Today's battles are fought over player safety, guaranteed money, and post-career healthcare. The new generation of players understands the game off the field as well as they do on it. Social media gave them a megaphone, something their predecessors never had. Collective action doesn't always mean strikes anymore. Sometimes it means public pressure, solidarity through visibility, and speaking directly to millions of fans who once only heard the owner's side. Looking back across decades, the NFL's labor wars mirror the broader American struggle between capital and labor, power and fairness, control and freedom. The league sells unity on Sundays, but beneath the helmets and broadcasts lies a story of rebellion and reform. Every touchdown we celebrate, every contract we analyze, carries echoes of those men who risked everything for rights that fans now take for granted. Today, when a rookie signs a multi-million-dollar guaranteed deal, or when a veteran sits out training camp to negotiate better terms, they're not just playing the business game, they're living in the world that Mackey, White, and Brady built through defiance. The league may call it labor relations, but for those who lived it, it was nothing short of a war for respect. And in every war, there are casualties, the ones who fought early, lost everything, and never saw the fruits of victory. But without their sacrifice, football would still be a game owned entirely by boardrooms, instead of shared with the men who give their blood for it. The labor wars of the NFL aren't over. They've just moved underground, waiting for the next generation to decide what fairness means in a sport built on collisions, and off the field. The NFL has always called itself the Shield. It's more than a logo, it's an idea. It's a symbol of unity, integrity, and control. But what the public rarely sees is what that shield was built to do. Not just represent the game, but to protect it, no matter the cost. For decades, the league's image has been guarded like state secrets, because behind the spectacle of Sunday glory lies a machinery of damage control, denial, and calculated spin. From the outside, the NFL looks unstoppable, the richest league in the world, a cultural religion in America. But from the inside, it has been a constant war between truth and preservation. When you dig deep enough, you begin to realize that every scandal that threatened the NFL's reputation didn't just expose wrongdoing. It revealed how far the league would go to hide it. The most haunting of those battles began with something invisible: the concussion crisis. For years, players complained of migraines, memory loss, mood swings. They forgot names, lost focus, sometimes turned violent. The hits that thrilled fans every Sunday were destroying lives silently. The science was there long before the league acknowledged it. Neurologists, independent researchers, even team doctors saw the signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, in the brains of former players. But the league's response wasn't transparency, it was defense. In 1994, as evidence began to surface, the NFL formed what it called the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. On paper, it sounded responsible. In practice, it was a wall, a shield of denial. The committee, led by league-appointed doctors, repeatedly dismissed or downplayed studies linking concussions to long-term brain damage. One of the most damning moments came in 2005, when Dr. Bennett Omalu, a Nigerian-born neuropathologist, published his findings on former Pittsburgh Steeler Mike Webster. Iron Mike, a Hall of Fame center who had spiraled into homelessness, confusion, and depression before dying at 50. Omalu's autopsy revealed severe CTE, the first concrete proof that football could literally destroy the brain. Instead of embracing the truth, the NFL tried to discredit him. They called his work flawed, accused him of misunderstanding the sport, and pressured medical journals to retract his research. The shield held firm. But the cracks had started. More former players began to die: Terry Long, Andre Waters, Jr. So. Each case looked eerily similar. Yet for years, the NFL stayed silent, running PR campaigns about player safety while quietly funding research designed to muddy the science. Behind closed doors, owners worried not about the players, but about the lawsuits and the money. If football was proven to cause brain damage, the entire empire could crumble. By the early 2010s, the crisis could no longer be contained. Thousands of former players banded together, filing a class-action lawsuit against the league for concealing the dangers of concussions. The evidence was overwhelming: internal emails, testimonies, decades of negligence. The league finally agreed to a $765 million settlement in 2013, a massive sum that, in reality, only scratched the surface of the damage done. The NFL didn't admit guilt, and it didn't promise reform. But the shield had taken its first real dent. And that was just one front in the war for image. Because while the concussion scandal exposed the league's medical negligence, other stories revealed its moral blind spots. The NFL's public relations strategy has long been about optics, about control. When star players were arrested, when coaches were caught cheating, when executives crossed ethical lines, the goal wasn't accountability. It was containment. Take Spygate in 2007. The New England Patriots, the league's reigning dynasty, were caught illegally videotaping opposing teams' defensive signals. The scandal was undeniable. The evidence was in hand. Yet the NFL's punishment was swift and minimal: a $500,000 fine for Bill Belichick, the loss of a draft pick, and an order to destroy all videotapes. Destroy them as if erasing the tapes could erase the truth. It wasn't just about protecting a team, it was about protecting the league's golden brand, the aura of perfection. Then came Bountygate. In 2012, the New Orleans Saints were accused of running a bounty system, players being paid to injure opponents. The league handed down massive suspensions and portrayed itself as taking the moral high ground. But behind the scenes, that outrage wasn't about ethics. It was about optics. The NFL wanted to remind America that it controlled the narrative. It wasn't afraid to sacrifice a few to protect the many. The same pattern appeared in domestic violence cases. The most infamous, Ray Rice, in 2014. A video surfaced showing the Baltimore Ravens running back punching his fiancée unconscious in an elevator. The NFL's initial punishment was 2 games until the full video was leaked to the public. Suddenly, the league changed its tune, indefinitely suspending Rice and claiming it hadn't seen the footage. But investigative journalists later revealed the league had access to it all along. The real punishment came only after the public saw what the NFL had tried to bury. That was the moment many fans realized the Shield wasn't just about protecting the game. It was about protecting the brand, even when that meant betraying truth. The league didn't just control information, control perception. It hired top PR firms, political strategists, and even former government operatives to manage crises. Every headline, every statement, every apology was calibrated for damage control. In 2015, another scandal tested that machine to Flatigate. When Tom Brady and the Patriots were accused of using underinflated footballs in the AFC Championship game, the league pounced. It launched a high-profile investigation, suspending Brady and making an example out of the sport's biggest star. Some saw justice. Others saw hypocrisy. Compared to the league's years of silence on brain injuries or domestic abuse, the sudden moral outrage over air pressure looked absurd. But again, the motive was the same: control. The NFL couldn't allow the integrity of the game itself to be questioned. Behind all this was a truth few inside the league dared to speak. The Shield was both protector and prisoner. It kept the game profitable, but it also buried its conscience. It taught generations of executives that image mattered more than accountability, that admitting fault was worse than committing it. The result was an institution addicted to secrecy, even as the world changed around it, as social movements rose. As players spoke out on racial justice, as fans demanded transparency, the NFL's reflex remained the same: defend the Shield. When Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem in 2016 to protest police brutality, the league's response wasn't empathy, it was exile. Owners blacklisted him, hiding behind vague statements about distractions. It took years and a nationwide reckoning before the NFL publicly admitted it had mishandled the moment. But by then, the damage was done. The Shield had shown its true purpose again: not to lead, but to preserve itself. And yet, even now, despite all the scandals, the NFL stands stronger than ever. The money keeps flowing, the ratings soar. The public outrage cycles and fades. The league's PR machine, polished, relentless, brilliant, turns every controversy into a comeback story. Players wear helmets, teams wear logos, and the Shield remains untarnished in the eyes of millions. But if you look closely, you can still see the cracks, the ghosts of cover-ups, the silenced whistleblowers, the quiet settlements. The NFL's greatness has always been real. So has its darkness. The same machine that built America's favorite game also built walls around its truth. And in doing so, it became more than a sport. It became a reflection of the country that worships it. Powerful, flawed, unyielding, and forever protecting its own myth. The Shield still shines. But the light that hits it carries every shadow the league ever tried to hide. The NFL Draft is one of the grandest illusions in sports. Every spring, millions of fans tune in to watch dreams come true. A procession of young men. Their names called beneath bright lights, shaking hands with commissioners, smiling for cameras. It feels like a celebration of destiny. But underneath the spectacle lies something colder: control, valuation, and commerce disguised as opportunity. The draft is not just about selecting players. It's about assigning worth. It's the moment when a human being becomes an asset, a contract, a calculation, a future revenue stream. And that's what makes it one of the most powerful tools of capitalism in sports. When the first NFL draft was held in 1936, there was no television broadcast, no sponsorship deals, no red carpet. It took place in a Philadelphia hotel, and the league was struggling to survive. Teams couldn't compete financially for top college players, so the draft was designed as an equalizer, a system to distribute talent fairly, giving weaker teams first choice. But in truth, it was about control. By restricting players from negotiating freely, the NFL could fix their value before they ever stepped onto a field. That system, now celebrated as a tradition, began as a restraint. It stripped players of leverage, turning their futures into corporate transactions. Back then, the players had no agents, no unions, no voice. They signed for whatever a team offered, or they didn't play at all. Fast forward to today, and the draft has evolved into a billion-dollar entertainment product. The stage is colossal, the lights blinding. Cities compete to host it, pouring in millions to secure the event because it drives tourism, ratings, and advertising. ESPN and the NFL Network broadcast it for 3 days straight, turning contract negotiations into national theater. Sponsors flood the stage: Nike, Bud Light, Verizon, each logo woven seamlessly into the celebration. Every detail is orchestrated to perfection. The players' families sit under cameras, their reactions filmed in real time. Analysts debate each pick, ranking lives by upside and risk. Even the walk to the podium is choreographed. The embrace, the handshake, the photo. It's the NFL's most efficient production line. But what's really happening in that moment? A lifetime of work, blood, pain, sacrifice, gets converted into a salary cap figure. The value of a dream, quantified in guaranteed money. For every first-round selection who signs a multi-million-dollar deal, hundreds of other athletes go undrafted. Their worth decided in minutes, their futures left to chance. For the players who make it, the business starts immediately. Before they've even put on a uniform, their agents and teams negotiate clauses, bonuses, endorsements. Rookie contracts are slotted, predetermined by draft position, so even the #1 overall pick, Dosen, T, truly negotiate. They sign what the system dictates. The excitement you see on stage masks the reality. The terms were set long before they heard their name. Behind the curtain, team executives and financial analysts study players like stock portfolios. They chart injury risks, marketability, hometown appeal. Every player represents potential profit in ticket sales, jersey revenue, media visibility. Scouts call it character evaluation, but it's also a branding exercise. Teams aren't just choosing who can help them win. They're choosing who can sell. And that's the quiet truth. The NFL draft is capitalism's perfect mirror. The league has transformed the act of acquiring labor into televised entertainment. In the process, it controls every variable, from player mobility to salary growth. The draft ensures that no rookie, no matter how talented, can set his own market value. The same system that glorifies competition suppresses economic freedom. Take the story of Bo Jackson. In 1986, he was drafted first overall by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Jackson, fiercely independent, refused to play for them. The Bucs had sabotaged his college eligibility, and he decided to walk away from the NFL entirely. Instead, he signed with Major League Baseball's Kansas City Royals. It was a rare act of rebellion, a man refusing to be owned. When he eventually returned to football, it was on his own terms. But the system barely flinched. The draft endured, unshaken, because for every Bo Jackson who walked away, thousands lined up to take his place. Decades later, when Eli Manning refused to play for the San Diego Chargers in 2004, forcing a trade to the New York Giants, it made headlines. But again, it was the exception, not the rule. The league's power structure remained intact. Even today, the draft serves the same purpose it did in 1936: to maintain control of labor while giving the illusion of opportunity. For players, the business of the draft begins long before draft day. They hire trainers, publicists, and social media managers. They fly to combines and pro days, where every movement, every sprint, jump, and handshake is measured, graded, and broadcast. The process is exhaustive, reducing identity to metrics: 40-yard dash times, vertical leaps, hand sizes. It's the corporate scouting system at its peak, where the human body becomes data, and data becomes currency. The combine itself, once a private evaluation, has become a televised event. Fans tune in to watch 20-year-olds run, lift, and stretch. Networks package it as entertainment, but to the players, it's an auction block. Every rep determines their price. And once drafted, the cycle deepens. Rookie minicamps, marketing photo shoots, sponsorship deals. The business begins before the football does. It's no coincidence that many first-rounders appear in commercials before their first preseason snap. The league and its corporate partners know the window for hype is short. Sell the dream before reality sets in. That reality hits hardest when the numbers fade. For every household name that signs a long-term extension, dozens of draftees are cut before their second season. Some never play it down. Others end up buried on practice squads, forgotten until the next draft. The spectacle doesn't account for the aftermath. Once the lights dim, the players who don T make it simply vanish, names replaced by the next class of hopefuls. And yet, fans keep watching, captivated by the emotion of it all, because the draft feels pure. The promise of tomorrow, the rebirth of teams, the hope of change. It's the one time of year when every franchise feels alive again. That emotional power is what the league sells, and it sells it perfectly. The numbers prove it. The 2023 NFL Draft drew more than 54 million viewers across platforms. Las Vegas, Nashville, Kansas City, every host city reported record tourism and revenue. The draft is now one of the league's biggest cash cows. It's not just a sporting event. It's an economic festival. And like everything else in the NFL, it's meticulously monetized, from ticketed fan zones to branded merchandise. When Roger Goodell steps onto that stage to announce the first pick, the cheers and boos that echo through the crowd aren't just for him. They're for the machine he represents. The draft isn't just about who will play next season. It's a ritual reaffirming who controls the game. The NFL sells the dream of meritocracy, that talent rises, that hard work is rewarded. And sometimes it's true. But beneath that dream is a structure built to ensure that the league, not the player, holds the power. Every rookie who walks onto that stage has earned his moment. But what the cameras don't show is the fine print, the years of control, the team options, the limited freedom. That's the paradox of the draft. It gives everything and takes everything. It's where legends begin, and ownership begins too. In the end, the NFL Draft isn't just about building teams. It's about building balance sheets. Hey, and yet, despite all of that, despite the structure, the control, the money, the moment a young man hears his name called still feels like magic. Because for him, it's not a transaction. It's the culmination of a dream. That is, the beauty and tragedy of the draft. Two truths existing at once, the dreamer and the deal, the glory and the greed. The draft stage will always shine bright, but behind those lights is the hum of calculation. The NFL doesn't just create stars, it creates investments. In every era of the NFL, there has been one truth whispered through locker rooms, boardrooms, and broadcast booths alike. The quarterback runs the economy of football, not just the playbook, not just the locker room, the economy. The league's entire financial gravity now orbits around one position. And that transformation didn't happen overnight. It was built over decades as leadership turned into leverage, and the quarterback, once just another soldier in the huddle, became the most valuable commodity in American sport. It wasn't always this way. In the 1950s and 60s, quarterbacks were respected, yes, but they weren't royalty. Johnny Unitas made about $7,000 his first year. Bart Starr, even at his peak, earned less than a journeyman lineman today. They were field generals, not moguls. Their power came from grit and charisma, not contracts. But as television reshaped football, as faces became brands, the quarterback became the league's first celebrity CEO. Joe Namath was the prototype. Broadway Joe. The man who wore fur coats and sunglasses, who understood that the NFL wasn't just sport anymore, it was theater. When he guaranteed victory in Super Bowl III, it wasn't just bravado, it was marketing. Namath made the quarterback the story. And with that, a financial revolution began. The NFL realized what it had, a position that could sell tickets, move ratings, and embody the team's identity. From Terry Bradshaw's toughness to Joe Montana's calm precision, the quarterback became the centerpiece of every narrative. Owners built entire franchises around them, and soon the contracts followed. By the late 1980s, Montana wasn't just a champion, he was an icon. His poise under pressure, his 4 Super Bowl rings, his clean image, they made him Madison Avenue gold. Brands lined up to attach themselves to him. He wasn't just selling victories, he was selling aspiration. And the league noticed. The quarterback's value was no longer measured in touchdowns alone. It was measured in marketability. Then came the modern shift, the era of the franchise quarterback. The player who could transform a struggling team into a global brand. In the 1990s, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, and Brett Favre redefined what the role meant. They were warriors and celebrities all at once, leading men in a drama broadcast to millions every Sunday. Their contracts climbed into the millions, and the quarterback's leverage grew with every passing year. But the biggest evolution came with the salary cap era. Introduced in 1994, the cap was designed to level the playing field to keep teams financially balanced. Instead, it created a new kind of economic arms race. Every team needed a quarterback, but the great ones became so rare, so valuable, that their price exploded. By the early 2000s, franchises were willing to mortgage entire rosters just to secure their signal caller. Peyton Manning changed the economics of intelligence, his preparation, his control over the offense. His image as the ultimate professional, it made him the blueprint for the modern franchise quarterback. When he signed a $98 million deal in 2011 with the Colts, it was staggering at the time. But it was also inevitable. Manny wasn't just playing football. He was managing an empire. His endorsements from Gatorade to Nationwide proved that the quarterback could be as valuable off the field as on it. Then came Tom Brady, the man who would redefine value altogether. Drafted 199th overall, Brady entered the league with no leverage, no fame, no expectation. But his rise with the New England Patriots showed something new. The quarterback wasn't just a position. It was a philosophy. Under Bill Belichick, Brady took pay cuts for the sake of the team, a selfless move that paradoxically increased his worth. He won, and winning became the brand. By the time he reached his 7th Super Bowl ring, Brady's name alone was worth more than entire franchises once were. But as Brady built a dynasty on sacrifice, a new generation saw power differently. They saw it as leverage. The quarterback had become so essential that entire front offices revolved around keeping them happy or losing everything. Aaron Rodgers embodied that new leverage. His precision, his cerebral style, and his awareness of his own market value allowed him to challenge authority in ways no player before him could. Rodgers wasn't afraid to question his team publicly, to negotiate through the media, to demand respect in both dollars and influence. The quarterback had become not just the leader, but the league's most politically powerful figure. And then came Patrick Mahomes, the face of a new era. His $503 million contract in 2020 didn't just reset the market, it redefined it. Mahomes was the perfect storm. Talent, charisma, relatability, and highlight reel magic. He was the product of everything the NFL had built. A superstar who could dominate the field and dominate culture simultaneously. His jersey sales broke records. His commercials became omnipresent. He was the NFL's best investment, and they knew it. Mahomes' contract was more than a paycheck. It was a declaration. The quarterback was no longer a player. He was a corporation. A team could lose its coach, its general manager, even its owner, and survive. But lose your quarterback, and the economy collapses. That's why in today's NFL, entire financial strategies revolve around one man. Teams build salary cap structures around the quarterback's deal, sometimes sacrificing depth, defense, or special teams to secure the star. The QB market now drives inflation across the league. When one quarterback gets paid, the next demands more. It's a chain reaction, a system where worth is relative, and every new deal becomes the baseline for the next. In 2023, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow all signed contracts worth hundreds of millions. Each deal was celebrated as progress, as fair compensation for elite talent. But it also revealed the imbalance. While quarterbacks earn generational wealth, the players who protect them, catch their passes, or take their hits, often fight for scraps of guaranteed money. The hierarchy is clear. The league pays for visibility. This is the quarterback economy, a marketplace where charisma, leadership, and production intersect with brand power. The position has become both a burden and a throne. Quarterbacks are expected to win games, sell tickets, command locker rooms, and represent entire franchises with flawless composure. Every word, every expression, every social post, all of it has monetary value. And that pressure comes with a cost. For every Mahomes who thrives under the spotlight, there, as a Baker Mayfield or Zach Wilson, young men handed millions and the weight of a city before they re-ready. The same system that glorifies them can destroy them overnight, because the higher the contract, the shorter the patience. The quarterback economy rewards instant success, not gradual growth. Even legends haven't escaped its grip. When Russell Wilson's mega deal in Denver turned disastrous, fans and media turned instantly. Once adored, he became a punchline. In this economy, love is transactional, and failure is unforgivable. The truth is, the quarterback has become a reflection of the league's soul, where performance meets profit, and leadership meets commerce. Once quarterbacks were judged by championships, now they're measured by market share. The job hasn't just evolved, it's been monetized to perfection. And yet, beneath the numbers, the human remains. In the quiet after the games, when the helmets come off and the cameras fade, every quarterback faces the same question. Was it worth it? The fame, the contracts, the control, or did the game take more than it gave? Because at its core, the quarterback economy isn't just about money. It's about power. Who has it, who keeps it, and who pays for it when it slips away. It's easy to forget, watching a Sunday night kickoff, that the field beneath those blinding lights is not just turf, it's a marketplace. Every inch of the game, every camera angle, every halftime ad break is part of a billion-dollar negotiation. The NFL is not simply a league, it's a brand ecosystem. A meticulously engineered alliance between corporations, broadcasters, and billion-dollar sponsors who don't just fund football, they define it. The story of corporate power in the NFL begins long before the digital billboards and branded hashtags. In the 1970s, as television transformed the league into a weekly national ritual, companies like Ford, Coca-Cola, and Miller Beer realized something seismic. The NFL wasn't just entertainment. It was America's heartbeat. Aligning with football meant access to millions of households, to working-class pride, to family living rooms where every play carried emotional currency. Sponsorship became something more than advertising. It was identity, and soon, it was control. When Anheuser-Busch signed its first major sponsorship deal with the league, it wasn't just about selling beer. It was about owning Sunday. The Budweiser logo appeared so frequently, so seamlessly, that fans began to equate beer with football itself. a cultural pairing that outlived players, dynasties, even stadiums. The Bud Bowl commercials of the 1980s blurred the line between parody and prophecy. Bottles competing like teams, products mimicking athletes, the entire spectacle monetized to perfection. But as the profits grew, so did the stakes. The league became a battleground for corporate dominance: Pepsi versus Coke, Nike versus Reebok, Verizon versus AT&T. Each deal was more than a business contract. 'Twas a declaration of territory. Stadiums turned into billboards. Team facilities carried sponsor names, even halftime shows. Once raw entertainment evolved into global marketing showcases where brands competed for cultural supremacy. By the early 2000s, sponsorship deals were shaping how the game was seen, felt, and even played. When Nike reclaimed its uniform contract in 2012, it wasn't just about jerseys. It was about control of the league's visual identity. Fabric, fit, and color schemes became the language of branding. Players turned into walking advertisements, their bodies wrapped in corporate signatures. And yet, the league didn't just allow it, it encouraged it. Because corporate money gave the NFL something priceless: immunity. As long as the sponsor stayed, the show stayed. Scandals could be weathered, boycotts ignored, critics dismissed. In the eyes of the NFL, brand loyalty meant survival. But that survival came at a cost. When controversy struck, from concussion lawsuits to political protests, the corporate partners became both shield and leash. Sponsors quietly dictated tone and tolerance. If a movement threatened the optics, advertisers pulled back. If a controversy risked market value, the league pivoted overnight. The illusion of independence faded. The NFL had become a client of its own sponsors. One of the clearest examples came during the national anthem protests. As players took a knee, networks panned their cameras elsewhere. Commentators hesitated. League statements were cautious, layered with PR neutrality. Why? Because brands didn't want division. The NFL's corporate heartbeat demanded consistency. A smooth, unbroken rhythm that could sell soft drinks, cars, and cable packages. The players might have been fighting for justice, but the sponsors were fighting for comfort. Behind the scenes, executives in boardrooms shaped the moral language of the sport. The beer companies wanted family-friendly broadcasts. The apparel giants wanted heroes. The broadcasters wanted storylines. The NFL's leadership learned to navigate them all, bending to the rhythm of the marketplace. Even the Super Bowl, once a championship game, evolved into an advertising ritual that happened to feature football. The halftime show became the world's most expensive marketing platform. Artists like Beyoncé, The Weeknd, and Rihanna didn't get paid in cash. They got exposure, a global audience, and brand deals waiting on the other side. The game itself became almost secondary, a bridge between commercials. Yet beneath that glamour lies a quieter story. Local stadiums, the physical temples of the NFL's empire, became collateral in corporate warfare. Cities were promised economic growth if they funded billion-dollar venues. But those stadiums often served as tax-subsidized monuments to private wealth. Naming rights alone became an industry. AT&T Stadium, Gillette Stadium, SoFi Stadium. Each one a towering reminder that identity had been bought and branded. The irony. The fans who built the league, who bought tickets, wore jerseys. Cheered in freezing stands often ended up paying twice. Once in taxes, and again at the concession stand. The corporate money that flowed into the league didn't trickle down. It climbed upward, reinforcing the same hierarchy that defined every boardroom and balance sheet. Still, the power of sponsorship remains the invisible spine of the NFL. It funds player salaries, network contracts, and even social initiatives, the Crucial Catch campaign. The Salute to Service uniforms, all wrapped in corporate co-branding, all monetized through charitable optics. The line between goodwill and marketing has blurred beyond recognition. What's perhaps most haunting is that this system works brilliantly. The NFL's corporate partnerships have made it the most profitable sports league in the world. Each Super Bowl generates over $500 million in advertising revenue alone. Sponsorships now account for more than $1 billion annually. Every product placement, every halftime logo, every sideline microphone is calibrated to generate return. But beneath those billions lies an uncomfortable truth. The sport itself has become secondary to its packaging. Football remains the heart, but commerce is the bloodstream. And when money becomes the measure of meaning, the human element, the sweat, the sacrifice, the loyalty risks fading into background noise. Still, there's a strange poetry in how this evolution mirrors America itself. The NFL grew in parallel with the rise of corporate capitalism. As Wall Street boomed, so did the league's valuations. As advertising became an art form, football became its masterpiece. The game became a mirror for the nation's ambitions and its appetites. And yet, somewhere in the shadows, the question remains. When every moment is sponsored, when every narrative is approved, what's left of the game itself? What happens to authenticity when the scoreboard doubles as a marketing tool? Archival footage. A crowd roars as the camera pans over a massive LED wall plastered with logos. Then silence. The field empty. The lights dim. The sponsors will always return. The brands will always buy in. The logos will always shine brightest when the players bleed the hardest. Because in the NFL, the war for attention never ends. It only gets rebranded. It began with a dream and a flight. When the NFL sent its first official regular season game across the Atlantic in 2007, it wasn't just testing turf. It was testing loyalty. On that damp October afternoon at Wembley Stadium, as the New York Giants faced the Miami Dolphins, the air carried more than the smell of rain and grass. It carried the scent of ambition, the unmistakable aroma of global expansion. The NFL had conquered Sunday in America. Now, it wanted the world. But behind the speeches about growing the game and sharing the passion, something quieter stirred. This wasn't only about sport. It was about empire. The league's leaders, driven by profit and vision, saw untapped markets, millions of new fans, billions in sponsorships, merchandise, and broadcasting rights. The NFL, once the heart of American grit, was preparing to sell that identity, one country at a time. The story of global expansion isn't new. It mirrors the history of business itself. A product becomes powerful at home, then sets sail abroad. Yet football wasn't built for export. Its rules, culture, and cadence were deeply American, a reflection of industrial power, teamwork, and risk-taking. It wasn't global like soccer, or simple like basketball. The NFL's game was complex, violent, and deeply tribal. But that, perhaps, was its allure. The league's first real experiment with globalization began decades earlier. In the late 1980s, with the birth of the World League of American Football, later rebranded as NFL Europe. It was supposed to be the farm system of the future, a way to scout international talent, build global fandom, and spread the gospel of the gridiron. For a moment, it worked. Cities like Frankfurt, London, and Barcelona cheered under the lights for teams with names like the Galaxy, the Monarchs, and the Dragons. The dreams seemed real. Fans waved flags, sang chants, and even learned the language of touchdowns and field goals. But by 2007, the experiment ended. The league folded. Costs were too high, audiences too small. Yet something had changed. The NFL had learned that the appetite was there, scattered, passionate, waiting. It just needed to be fed differently. So, the league pivoted. Instead of building teams abroad, it exported its best spectacle, the real game, the Super Bowl, the icons, the storylines. If you couldn't bring the world into the NFL, you could bring the NFL into the world. London became the bridgehead. The NFL International Series drew crowds of over 80,000. Fans from across Europe filled Wembley and Tottenham Stadium. Their jerseys a patchwork of every American team imaginable. It didn't matter who played, Jaguars or Patriots, Bears or Raiders, because they weren't cheering for geography. They were cheering for mythology, for a taste of the machine that America had built. Mexico came next. The passion there wasn't new. It had simmered since the 1970s when NFL broadcasts reached Mexican television. But in 2016, when the league staged its first modern-era game at Estadio Azteca, the sound was thunderous. More than 75,000 fans roared as the Raiders and Texans clashed beneath the high-altitude haze. The league executives smiled. The vision was working. Germany followed Munich and Frankfurt. In 2022 and 2023, tickets sold out in minutes. Fans sang American anthems, waving signs written in English. When Tom Brady took the field in Munich, it wasn't just a game. It was a coronation. The NFL had found new disciples. But beneath the celebration, a quieter tension brewed. Every new market meant new compromises. The league that once defined itself by local rivalries, Cleveland versus Pittsburgh, Dallas versus Washington, was now a global commodity. The intimacy of fandom was being traded for scalability. Stadiums were filled, but cultures blurred. The chants were universal, but the roots were thinning. In boardrooms back home, executives plotted the next frontier. Could there be an international division? Could a London-based franchise survive the logistics? What about streaming audiences in Asia, merchandising in Africa, or training camps in South America? The hunger was insatiable, not just for expansion, but for omnipresence. Yet with every leap, the league risked losing the very thing that made it sacred, its local soul. The NFL was born from small towns and steel mills, from high school fields under Friday night lights. It was an American ritual, long before it was a global export. And now, that ritual was evolving into something shinier, broader, and perhaps emptier. Money was the catalyst, but the transformation went deeper. Every international deal came with corporate sponsors eager to align their brands with America's game. Global rights packages were sold to networks from Sky Sports to DAZN. Streaming giants circled the league like hawks. The NFL became not just a sport, but a franchise of modern capitalism, adaptable, profitable, and endlessly marketable. Even the players felt the shift. They became ambassadors as much as athletes. Jerseys weren't just sold to hometown kids anymore. They were shipped worldwide. Social media turned players into global influencers. An interception in Chicago might trend in Tokyo within seconds. And while that fame brought opportunity, it also brought dissonance. Because for every fan who joined the global flock, there was another who felt left behind. There's a haunting image that captures this trade-off. A young boy in Texas, watching his team's home game being played in London. The stadium he used to visit is quiet that Sunday. The fans across the ocean cheer instead. It's still football, but it's not home. The league argues that this global push strengthens the sport, that more fans mean more resources, better facilities, higher salaries, and greater longevity. They're not wrong. The NFL's international revenue has skyrocketed. Merchandise sales surged in Europe and Latin America. The Super Bowl broadcast now reaches over 180 countries. But expansion always comes with erosion. For every new flag the NFL plants, it buries a little more of its old identity. The local chants, the cold bleachers, the American grit that made the game more than a product. The global NFL is louder, richer, and flashier. But is it better? Or has it simply learned how to sell its nostalgia to the highest bidder? Because the truth is, the NFL's globalization isn't about cultural exchange, it's about financial conquest. It's about the same force that drove every chapter of its history, the endless chase for profit. The league's leaders see the map of the world as a playbook, with each market a new down to convert. And every fan, whether in Kansas or Cologne, becomes part of the same economic drive. Still, there's no denying the spectacle's power. When the American anthem echoes through a German stadium, when fans from 4 continents wear the same jersey, When a child in London knows the name Patrick Mahomes as easily as Messi, something remarkable has happened. The NFL has become a global language, translated through dollars, dreams, and drama. And yet, as the lights fade after another sold-out game abroad, the question lingers. The same one whispered in locker rooms and corporate suites alike. How far can expansion go before the soul of the game is lost? When every yard gained in profit costs another in authenticity, where does the line fall between growth and greed? Because in the end, the NFL's global rise mirrors its internal truth. The league will always chase more markets, more money, more myth. It's built into its DNA. It's the very essence of American ambition. But somewhere, in the echoes of an empty stadium, whether in Dallas or Dusseldorf, the silence asks one final question. What happens when the game finally belongs to everyone, but no one feels it's theirs anymore? Immortality. In football, it isn't written in stone or ink. It's written in scars, in numbers, in memories that refuse to fade. Every player who's ever stepped onto that field has chased it. The illusion that one perfect game, one defining moment, can make them eternal. But immortality always comes at a price. And in the NFL, that price has been paid in full, with broken bodies, fractured identities, and the quiet erosion of what this sport once meant. The pursuit of greatness is older than the league itself. It's the myth the NFL was built on, men rising from nothing, forging glory on the gridiron. But somewhere along the line, that pursuit shifted. The chase for legacy was replaced by the chase for leverage. The trophy became a brand. The player became a business. And immortality stopped being about being remembered. It became about being marketable. I think about players who reached the mountaintop and discovered there was nothing waiting for them but silence. The moment after the final whistle, when the crowd's roar collapses into emptiness. The men who once ruled Sundays now fade into the background, replaced by the next prodigy, the next millionaire face of the league. For all the millions earned, for all the records shattered, so few walk away whole. Consider the greats, men like Junior Seau, who gave his life to the game and lost it to its toll. Or Terrell Owens, who redefined the art of self-promotion and found himself exiled by the same system he mastered. Or Brett Favre, Antonio Brown, Adrian Peterson, each a mirror reflecting the duality of fame, revered on the field, haunted off it. Immortality in the NFL's world is fleeting. It lasts only as long as the highlight reel does. But it isn't just the players who pay. The fans do too. For decades, football was more than entertainment. It was a ritual. Towns gathered under Friday lights. Families huddled around televisions every Sunday. Now, the sport that once unified communities has been stretched, packaged, and sold to global audiences. The price of immortality for the league has been the dilution of intimacy. The fan doesn't just cheer for their team anymore. They consume it, scroll it, stream it. Football has become a product so polished it barely remembers where it came from. The league itself has become its own myth-maker, a machine that sells nostalgia while constantly reinventing itself to stay relevant. Every documentary, every commercial, every Hall of Fame speech reminds us of the legacy, the golden age, the heroes, the drama. But behind the curtain lies a truth that's harder to celebrate. The NFL's version of immortality isn't about memory. It's about momentum. The league doesn't stop to mourn. It monetizes. The show must go on, no matter who gets left behind. The economics of the modern game amplify that truth. Players now sign contracts worth $500 million. Stadiums cost billions more. Networks pay tens of billions for the right to broadcast the spectacle. And yet, for all the financial glory, the human toll remains incalculable. CTE, chronic pain, depression, addiction, they are the quiet taxes of immortality. The costs that don't appear in the box score or the balance sheet. Listen closely to the way the league talks about legacy. It's never about what was lost, only about what was gained. The game has never been bigger. The players have never been richer. The sport has never been more global. All true. But at what cost? When the pursuit of more becomes endless, does immortality still mean anything? There's a story of a veteran offensive lineman, anonymous but familiar, who once said, "They don't pay you for the game. They pay you for what the game takes from you." That line, raw and unvarnished, captures the essence of this era. For every contract signed, a piece of something deeper is surrendered: health, identity, time. Players are told to chase their moment in history, but few are told what happens after it ends. The league glorifies resilience: play through the pain, next man up. Leave it all on the field. It's the mantra of immortality, but it's also the recipe for self-destruction. Because to be immortal in the NFL, you have to die a little each week. You have to give away parts of yourself that can never be reclaimed. And the moment you stop giving, the machine moves on. Even the Hall of Fame, the supposed temple of football immortality, tells a conflicted story. Bronze busts line the halls, names etched in history, but outside those walls, life goes on without them. New stars rise, new records fall, and yesterday's legends become yesterday's news. Immortality in football isn't eternal. It's rented. Yet the paradox runs deeper. The very greed that threatens the soul of the sport also fuels its myth. Without money, the league wouldn't have the reach, the power, the spectacle. The Super Bowl wouldn't be a global event. The players wouldn't be household names, and the sport wouldn't dominate culture the way it does. The money built the machine, but it also bound it in chains. Every decision, every expansion, every innovation is tied to profit, and profit demands immortality. For the players, it's a personal war between body and ambition, between legacy and peace. For the league, it's cultural, between heritage and modernity, between the purity of the game and the power of the brand. And for the fans, it's emotional, between loyalty and cynicism, between love of the sport and awareness of its cost. In this battle, no one truly wins. The league survives, the players retire, the fans move on, but the hunger remains. Because immortality in the NFL was never about living forever. It was about never being forgotten, even if being remembered means being consumed. When I look back across the league's history, from the muddy fields of the 1920s to the billion-dollar stadiums of today, I see a reflection of America itself. A nation obsessed with greatness, haunted by excess, and forever chasing the next frontier. The NFL is its mirror: brilliant, flawed, unstoppable. It celebrates its heroes, but rarely saves them. It builds empires, but it also buries them. There's a moment that defines this paradox: the instant after a championship confetti falls. Players cry, families celebrate, owners beam, and the cameras capture the pinnacle of human joy. But if you look closely, behind the smiles, there's something else: exhaustion, relief, fear. Because even at the peak, they know the clock has started ticking again. The off-season begins, the cycle restarts, the glory fades. Immortality in football isn't a destination, it's a mirage. The closer you get, the more it demands. The fans keep watching, the players keep playing, the money keeps flowing, and the myth keeps growing. But the silence after the final whistle tells a different story. A story of men who gave everything for a moment the world would soon forget. So, what is the price of immortality? It's the weight of expectations, the fracture of identity, the loss of simplicity. It's the understanding that in the NFL, nothing is ever truly yours. Not the fame, not the fortune, not even the body that carried you there. And yet, somehow, the chase continues. Because for every player who falls, another rises, drawn by the same promise. It's the same dream of being untouchable, unbreakable, unforgettable. It's the great illusion that keeps the machine alive. The league will always sell immortality because it knows one truth: people will always buy it. But when the lights dim and the confetti melts into the turf, the real question lingers in the air like smoke. What remains when the glory fades and all that's left is the cost of what it took to get there? When I look back on everything the league has become, the spectacle, the empire, the billion-dollar dream, I realize that every ounce of its greatness came from the same well that feeds its darkness. The same ambition that built stadiums into modern cathedrals is the ambition that buried the purity of the game beneath layers of profit. The same fire that pushed players to chase immortality pushed the league to chase monopoly. Every story, from the men on the field to the men in the owners' boxes, comes down to one question: how much are we willing to give for greatness? And who decides what that greatness is worth? The NFL was never just about football. It was a reflection of America itself, a land of risk and reward, of hustle and hunger, of dreams sold as destiny. The men who built the league were visionaries and gamblers, chasing power through sport, through television, through every dollar they could squeeze out of the passion of millions. And for decades, we applauded them for it. We wanted the lights brighter, the stakes higher, the moments grander. We made heroes out of titans and turned Sunday into a ritual. But somewhere along the way, that ritual stopped being about the game and started being about the machine that controls it. There was a time when the field was the whole world, when men played because the roar of the crowd was the only currency that mattered. You could feel the honesty of it, the raw sweat, the bruised ribs, the brotherhood forged through blood and dirt. The paycheck was modest, the fame fleeting, but the pride was eternal. Now the league feels like an empire, too vast to remember its roots. The game is still beautiful, violent, poetic, precise, but it's filtered through contracts, brands, and analytics. The emotion still exists, but it's packaged, monetized, and sold. The irony is that the league never truly lost its soul. It simply traded it piece by piece for a kind of immortality that only money can buy. From Montana's grace to Mahomes' magic, from locker rooms filled with veterans to boardrooms filled with billionaires, the story has always been the same. Football evolves because America demands it too. The league follows the flow of culture, adapting, expanding, monetizing. And yet, at its core, it's still a game played by men who want to matter, by fans who want to belong, by a nation that wants to believe in something greater than itself. But belief has a price. For every dollar earned, something else was spent: integrity, innocence, humanity. Players gave their bodies. Fans gave their faith. Communities gave their loyalty. And in return, they were given an empire. A dazzling, unstoppable machine of entertainment and identity. But like every empire in history, it came with its ghosts. The concussions, the scandals, the labor strikes, the silent injuries that outlast careers. These are the shadows of greatness. And they grow longer every year. The league tells us that football is family. That it's unity, teamwork, shared glory. And maybe it is, in moments. But behind that message lies the truth of every empire. Family serves the throne. The NFL learned to sell togetherness while dividing everything into commodities, time slots, ad space, player likenesses, even memories. Nostalgia became a product. Loyalty became leverage. Every fan's devotion became data for someone else's profit margin. And yet, somehow, we still love it. Because deep down, we want to believe that the spirit of the game survives in spite of what has been done to it. I think about the players who came before, the ones who built this foundation without knowing they were building a dynasty. They weren't chasing endorsements or brand deals. They were chasing something primal, to prove themselves, to feel alive, to matter in a world that didn't always offer that chance. They were the labor force of a dream that would later leave them behind. Many retired, broken, forgotten, their stories fading beneath the floodlights of modern fame. And yet, their sacrifice is still felt in every touchdown, every roar, every tear in the stands. What the league gained in power, it lost in perspective. The men in the front office learned to treat players as assets, not souls. The broadcasters learned to treat moments as ad inventory, not memories. And fans learned to expect perfection from athletes who were still, at the end of the day, human. That's the real tragedy of the empire. That the deeper it chases perfection, the further it drifts from authenticity. And still, we watch every week. Because football, in its essence, remains an art form of chaos and control. It's still a test of courage and will. It's still a mirror of what it means to push beyond your limits. The difference is that the mirror now reflects more than just players. It reflects us, our hunger for more, our fascination with dominance, our quiet acceptance of the price paid in exchange for the spectacle. There's a haunting beauty in that contradiction. The same game that unites millions also exploits thousands. The same moment that lifts a city can destroy a body. The same drive that makes a legend can also break a life. And maybe that's why football remains America's truest reflection, because it holds both glory and ruin in the same hand. When you strip away the sponsorships, the media rights, the digital empires, what remains is still a field of grass and men chasing a ball under the weight of hope. That image hasn't changed since the earliest days of the league. Maybe it never will. Because beneath the empire, the heart still beats, faint but real. Every player who lines up, every fan who stands to cheer, carries a piece of that unbroken thread. It's the pulse of something older and deeper than money. It's the reason we still care. In the end, the NFL didn't destroy its soul, it transformed it. The league became what America asked it to become: bigger, louder, richer, faster. It built an empire not just out of sport, but out of culture itself. And though the cost has been steep, though the shadows have grown tall, the flame remains. Because as long as there are men willing to chase glory under the lights, as long as there are fans willing to believe in the myth of the game, football will endure. But endurance is not the same as purity. The question that lingers now isn't whether the NFL will continue. It's what it will stand for when the money fades, when the empire reaches its limits. Can it still be about passion when everything around it screams profit? Can it still be a sport when it's become a system? Can it still be America's game when it mirrors America's greed more than its grit? The answer may lie not in the league's future, but in its past. In the moments before the empire. When the grass was rough, the uniform simple, the glory uncertain. When football was survival and triumph, not spectacle and business. If the league ever finds its way back to that feeling, not in form, but in spirit, maybe it will rediscover what made it sacred in the first place. Because greatness without purpose is just noise. And no amount of profit can buy back purity once it's gone. The NFL is an empire built on passion, but ruled by profit. And like all empires, it will one day face its reckoning. When the crowd's quiet and the lights dim, only one question will echo across the empty fields. Was it worth it?